Welcome, listener, to this calm journey through history designed to relax your mind and perhaps even lull you into a gentle slumber. Before we begin, I invite you to pause for a moment and leave a comment below, sharing where in the world you're tuning in from and what time of day it is for you right now. It's always nice to see how far around the world these tales reach. Now make yourself comfortable, take a deep breath, and let your imagination wander back in time with me to an era both familiar and foreign, the storied Wild West of 19th century America. Picture a vast, untamed frontier stretching to the horizon, rugged landscapes of sun-baked earth and towering mountains, where dreamers and desperados alike sought their fortunes. The Wild West looms large in our collective imagination, immortalized in countless novels, films, and television shows. Yet the true stories behind these legends are often stranger than fiction, and the realities of life on the frontier were far harsher and more unforgiving than the romanticized myths. Over the next hour or so, we'll explore the brutal challenges faced by those who ventured west in pursuit of land, riches, and a fresh start. We'll travel across hostile terrain, encounter the constant specters of violence, poverty, and disease, and hear the tales of extraordinary individuals who exemplified the grit and tenacity it took to survive in this uncompromising time and place. But more than just a catalogue of hardships, this is a story of the indomitable human spirit, of the lengths people will go to carve out a space for themselves and their communities against all odds. So, as we journey back to the Wild West, I invite you to put yourself in the dusty, well-worn boots of these frontiersmen and women, the good, the bad, and the in-between. Let's begin by painting a picture of the stage on which their lives unfolded, the beautiful but unforgiving landscape of the western frontier. Imagine yourself gazing out over a vast expanse of rugged, untamed wilderness. Depending on where you find yourself in this sprawling territory, you might be confronted by the cracked, sun-baked earth of the southwestern deserts, broken up by towering red rock formations and prickly cacti. Or perhaps you're standing at the foot of the mighty Rocky Mountains, their snow-capped peaks disappearing into the clouds above, the thin air burning your lungs as you contemplate the arduous journey ahead. This land is as breathtaking as it is brutal, a place of extremes where the scorching heat of summer gives way to the bone-chilling cold of winter, where flash floods can transform a dry creek bed into a raging torrent in a matter of minutes. Resources that settlers back east took for granted, like timber for building or fresh water for drinking, could be scarce or non-existent out here. Even the very ground beneath your feet could betray you with hidden sinkholes, venomous creatures, and treacherous terrain lurking around every bend. One of the most infamous examples of the dangers posed by this unforgiving landscape is the tragic tale of the Donner Party. In April 1846, a group of some 90 emigrants set out from Illinois, bound for California. They were woefully unprepared for the challenges that lay ahead. After a series of fateful decisions and delays, the party found themselves trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains as winter closed in. Battered by relentless blizzards and drifting snow, their food supplies dwindled and wood for fires became nearly impossible to find. As the weeks dragged on and starvation set in, survivors were forced to resort to cannibalism, eating the flesh of their fallen companions to survive. Only 48 members of the original party emerged from the mountains alive the following spring. Their harrowing story a testament to the merciless indifference of the Western wilds. While the Donner Party's ordeal is an extreme case, it illustrates the very real perils that lay in store for those who set out to make a new life on the frontier, often vastly underestimating the challenges ahead. But hostile landscapes were far from the only danger in the Wild West. In sharp contrast to the tightly knit social fabric and established institutions of the eastern states, the Western territories were a patchwork of loosely governed, often lawless places where settlers were largely left to fend for themselves. Imagine walking down the ramshackle main street of a frontier town, little more than a dusty collection of wooden buildings huddled together in the middle of nowhere. The only semblance of authority might be a sometimes corrupt local sheriff or a circuit judge who passes through every few months to mete out rough justice. With law enforcement spread thin and government services slow to reach these isolated outposts, the vacuum was often filled by opportunists and ne'er-do-wells looking to exploit the lack of oversight for their own gain. In the absence of a reliable legal system, many disputes were settled through vigilante justice or personal vendettas. Feuds could simmer for years, erupting into deadly violence at the slightest provocation. Even for those who tried to avoid trouble, the ubiquity of firearms and the high-strung hair-trigger atmosphere of frontier society meant that danger was never far away. This was the world in which stagecoach Mary Fields made her name. Born into slavery in Tennessee in the early 1830s, Mary lived a remarkable life that defied every constraint society attempted to place on her. After the Civil War and emancipation, she made her way west, eventually settling in the rough-and-tumble town of Cascade, Montana. Working as a mail carrier, Mary quickly earned a reputation as a crackshot and a woman not to be trifled with. She broke up altercations and defended herself with her trusty six-shooter, never backing down from a fight. One particularly harrowing incident occurred when a hired gun, evidently offended by Mary's refusal to defer to him, challenged her to a shootout. As the story goes, the two squared off in the middle of town, hands poised over their pistols. At the signal, Mary drew her weapon with lightning speed and fired a single shot, disarming her opponent and leaving him with a shattered wrist. From that day forwards, no one in Cascade dared to challenge Stagecoach Mary again. While Mary Fields triumphed in her confrontation, for many others, the constant spectre of violence in the Wild West led to tragic ends. The Lincoln County War, which erupted in the late 1870s in the New Mexico Territory, exemplified how the toxic mix of lawlessness, greed, and unchecked masculinity could escalate into a full-blown bloodbath. The conflict centered around a bitter rivalry between two factions of wealthy cattle barons and merchants, each vying for economic and political control of the region. As tensions mounted, both sides began amassing small armies of hired guns and ranch hands, among them a young Ohioan named William Bonney, better known to history as Billy the Kid. What followed was a months-long orgy of violence and retribution, with ambushes, assassinations and pitched battles erupting across Lincoln County. By the time the dust settled, dozens lay dead, including one of the original instigators of the conflict, Englishman John Tunstall, gunned down by a posse of his rivals' enforcers. The Lincoln County War captured the imaginations of newspaper readers back east, who thrilled to the bloody tales emerging from the western frontier. But for the residents of Lincoln County, caught in the crossfire of men's ruthless ambitions, the reality was one of terror, grief, and senseless loss of life. As harrowing as the threat of violence was, it was far from the only hardship faced by those who ventured west. For the vast majority, daily life was dominated by backbreaking labor in often brutal conditions, whether in mines, on ranches, or laying the tracks that gradually knitted the nation together. Consider the life of a typical cowboy, immortalized in countless Hollywood westerns as a figure of romance and adventure. In reality, theirs was a grueling, dangerous existence, often spent in the saddle for weeks on end, driving herds of cattle across hundreds of miles of unforgiving terrain. Cowpunchers contended with stampedes, treacherous river crossings, and the constant threat of injury or death from the horns or hooves of the unpredictable beasts in their charge. They braved blistering heat, driving rain, and the ever-present choking dust, subsisting on a monotonous diet of beans, dry biscuits, and black coffee. For black cowboys, like Nat Love, who estimates suggest made up as much as a quarter of the ranch hands in the postbellum West, these hardships were compounded by the ever-present specter of racism and discrimination. Born into slavery in Tennessee in 1854, Nat found his way west as a teenager after emancipation, where he quickly earned a reputation as a skilled horseman and dead-eye shot. Over the course of his long career, Nat worked on some of the most famous cattle drives of the era, facing down rustlers, hostile tribes, and the unforgiving elements with courage and aplomb. Yet despite his evident skill and experience, as a black man, he was routinely denied the respect and opportunities afforded his white counterparts. In his autobiography, Nat recounts one particularly galling incident when, after winning a roping and shooting contest against a field of white competitors, he was forced to accept his prize in secret for fear of violent reprisals from the angry crowd. For Nat and countless other black cowboys, life in the Wild West was a constant negotiation, carving out a place for oneself in a society that all too often viewed them as little more than expendable labor. The hardscrabble existence of the frontier was not limited to men alone. Women too faced extraordinary challenges as they sought to build lives and communities in the West, their stories often overlooked or downplayed in the male-dominated narrative of the era. Consider the remarkable saga of Olive Oatman. Born in Illinois in 1837, Olive was just 14 years old when her family joined a wagon train bound for California, seeking a fresh start and a piece of the golden dream. But their journey turned to tragedy when the family was attacked by a group of Native Americans in the Arizona desert. Olive's parents and 4 of her siblings were brutally killed, while she and her younger sister, Mary Ann, were taken captive. The girls spent 5 years living with their captors, during which time they were forcibly tattooed with distinctive blue chin markings and endured untold hardships. Eventually, Olive was traded to a neighboring tribe, the Mojave, who treated her with relative kindness and adopted her into their community. But her ordeal was far from over. When she was finally ransomed and returned to white society at the age of 19, Olive found herself an object of morbid fascination, her tattoos marking her as an exotic other in the eyes of the public. For the rest of her life, Olive grappled with the trauma of her experiences and the challenge of finding her place between two worlds. Her story, often sensationalized and distorted in the retelling, stands as a poignant reminder of the incredible resilience and adaptability demanded of women on the frontier who faced violence, isolation, and the constant threat of losing everything they held dear. The harshness of life in the Wild West was compounded by the ever-present specter of disease and the scarcity of medical care on the frontier. In an era before germ theory and modern sanitation, epidemics could devastate entire communities, while even routine illnesses and injuries often proved deadly in the absence of trained doctors and adequate supplies. Diseases like smallpox, cholera, and dysentery ran rampant in the close quarters of pioneer camps and settlements, where poor hygiene and contaminated water sources allowed them to spread like wildfire. Tuberculosis, or consumption, as it was known at the time, claimed countless lives, particularly among young adults in the prime of life. For women, the perils of childbirth were especially acute. Without access to proper medical care or even basic pain relief, mothers faced agonizing labors and a high risk of complications, like infection and hemorrhage. Infant and maternal mortality rates were staggeringly high, with some estimates suggesting that as many as 1 in 10 mothers died in childbirth on the frontier. In the face of such daunting odds, the work of women like Calamity Jane, the legendary frontierswoman and sometime nurse, stands out as a beacon of compassion and resilience. Born Martha Jane Cannery in Missouri in 1852, Calamity Jane grew up in a hardscrabble mining camp, orphaned at a young age, and left to fend for herself in a man's world. Over the course of her colourful life, Jane worked as a scout, a soldier, a gambler, and a performer in Wild West shows, earning her nickname for her fearless exploits and her penchant for rescuing wounded men under fire. But it was in her role as a nurse that Calamity Jane truly left her mark. During the devastating smallpox epidemic that swept through the Dakota Territory in the late 1870s, Jane worked tirelessly to care for the sick and dying, often putting herself at great personal risk. She nursed patients through the night, bathed their fevered bodies, and offered what comfort she could to the terrified and the grieving. While Jane's own life was marred by alcoholism and tragedy, she lost her own daughter to disease at a young age. Her selfless actions during the epidemic earned her the enduring respect and gratitude of those she served. In a time when medical care was scarce and fear ran high, Calamity Jane's courage and compassion were a light in the darkness for many on the frontier. As if the threats of violence, disease, and poverty were not enough, those who sought to make a life in the West also had to contend with the complex and often bloody relationships between settlers and the indigenous peoples whose lands they encroached upon. From the moment Europeans first set foot on the continent, the story of westward expansion was inextricably bound up with the displacement and decimation of Native American communities. As the frontier pushed ever further west in the 19th century, these conflicts only intensified, fueled by broken treaties, cultural misunderstandings, and the relentless appetite for land and resources. One particularly tragic chapter in this history unfolded in the mountains of Colorado in the 1860s, as gold discoveries brought a flood of white prospectors onto the traditional hunting grounds of the Ute people. Tensions quickly boiled over into violence, with Ute warriors launching raids on isolated mining camps and settlers retaliating with vigilante attacks. At the center of this conflict was the Ute chief Antonga Black Hawk, a skilled diplomat and a fierce defender of his people's way of life. As the situation deteriorated, Black Hawk sought to negotiate a peaceful resolution, even as younger warriors agitated for all-out war. But the discovery of gold in the San Juan Mountains in 1869 proved the final straw. As thousands of miners poured into the region, the US government unilaterally abrogated its treaty with the Utes, seizing vast swaths of their land and confining them to a tiny, barren reservation far from their ancestral home. For Black Hawk and his people, it was a crushing blow. Stripped of their land, their livelihood, and their sacred sites, the Utes were left to watch as their world was upended around them. Many succumbed to starvation, disease, and despair in the squalid conditions of the reservation. In 1890, a broken and embattled Black Hawk spoke to a reporter of his people's plight. "The white man has taken our land, killed our game, and shut us up on this narrow ridge, and we are dying of hunger. We have always been friends of the white man, but the white man is not the friend of the Indian." Black Hawk's story is just one thread in the larger tapestry of injustice and broken promises that defined the settler-indigenous relationship in the Wild West. For native peoples across the frontier, the coming of the white man spelled the end of ancient ways of life, the shattering of communities and families, and all too often, the spectre of violence and destruction. Against the backdrop of human brutality and the unforgiving landscape, those who called the Wild West home also had to contend with the caprice of nature itself. In a time before modern forecasting and infrastructure, settlers were at the mercy of the elements, with little protection against the awesome and destructive power of the natural world. Imagine huddling in a flimsy wooden shack as a prairie blizzard rages outside, the wind screaming through the gaps in the walls and the temperature plummeting to bone-chilling depths. Or picture yourself in a flimsy canvas tent, watching in terror as a funnel cloud snakes down from the green-black sky, ripping a path of destruction across the open range. For farmers and ranchers, the threat of drought was a constant spectre. with a single dry spell capable of wiping out an entire year's crop and leaving families on the brink of starvation. And when the rains did come, they often brought with them the scourge of locusts, great clouds of insects that descended on fields and gardens, devouring everything in their path. One particularly devastating locust swarm in the early 1870s stripped bare an estimated 198,000 square miles of farmland across the Great Plains, leaving behind a post-apocalyptic landscape of denuded fields and withered dreams. The impact on the region's economy was catastrophic, with many farmers driven into bankruptcy and forced to abandon their homesteads. But perhaps no threat loomed larger in the minds of settlers than the spectre of fire. In a land of dry grass and wooden buildings, a single spark could quickly become an all-consuming inferno, destroying homes, livestock, and lives with terrifying speed. The vast, rugged terrain of the American frontier presented numerous obstacles and dangers for the hardy settlers who ventured westward. From the scorching deserts of the Southwest to the treacherous mountain passes of the Rockies, the landscape was as breathtaking as it was unforgiving. In the arid regions, water was a precious commodity. Settlers had to carefully plan their journeys and encampments around the locations of springs, streams, and waterholes. Even then, drought could cause these life-sustaining sources to dry up unexpectedly. Flash floods were another deadly hazard in canyon country. A sudden downpour miles away could send a wall of water sweeping down an arroyo without warning, washing away tents, livestock, and any unfortunate souls in its path. Crossing the mountains, whether by wagon or on foot, was an arduous undertaking fraught with peril. The high alpine passes were only accessible for a few months each summer before becoming blocked by deep snow. Travelers had to time their treks carefully and be prepared to face steep precipices, rock slides, and sudden storms that could disorient and strand them in freezing temperatures. Many who attempted these crossings paid with their lives when starvation, exposure, or accident claimed them. Even those who made it through the mountains faced the ongoing challenges of finding food, shelter, and fuel in an untamed land. Game could be scarce, particularly after the mass slaughter of the bison herds. Wood for building and fires was a rare commodity on the barren plains. Settlers had to rely on buffalo chips, sagebrush, and yucca stumps for their cooking and heating needs. Perhaps no story better illustrates the potential for disaster than the harrowing ordeal of the Donner Party. In the spring of 1846, this group of 87 emigrants left Illinois in a wagon train bound for California. They were an eclectic mix: farmers, businessmen, young families with infants and small children, elderly grandparents, and bachelors seeking a new start. An ill-advised shortcut and a series of mishaps and poor decisions slowed their progress through Utah and Nevada. By the time they reached the Sierra Nevada in late October, winter storms had already begun, dumping heavy snow in the mountain passes. The party found themselves hopelessly stranded just shy of their destination. Supplies quickly ran low. The starving travelers ate their pack animals, their pets, old leather hides, anything to keep going. Some perished from exposure in makeshift cabins. Others died of starvation despite valiant attempts to reach California on homemade snowshoes to bring back food. As the winter dragged on and the snows deepened, the most shocking turn of events transpired. Some of the desperate survivors resorted to cannibalizing the bodies of their deceased companions. Though judged harshly by many, their gruesome actions reflected the extreme desperation of their plight. Only 48 of the original 87 lived to be rescued, gaunt, hollow-eyed spectres forever haunted by those who had been lost. The tragic fate of the Donner Party served as a grim warning of the dangers that awaited those who dared to test themselves against the wild frontier. But even settlers who avoided such dramatic calamities had to contend with the constant reality of living beyond the reach of civilization. In the early days of westward expansion, there was little in the way of organized law and order in these remote territories. Before official governments could be established, responsibility for community safety and peacekeeping often fell to vigilante groups. In some areas, these citizens' committees helped fill the void and protect settlers from bandits and other threats. But their extrajudicial nature also meant that miscarriages of justice occurred, with accused wrongdoers punished or even executed without due process. Even once US Marshals and local sheriffs began to assert authority, their jurisdiction often covered vast areas that required days of hard riding to patrol. Settlements could go weeks without seeing an official lawman. In the meantime, people largely had to look out for themselves and handle their own disputes as best they could. This combination of isolation, lack of oversight, and a well-armed populace created an environment ripe for exploitation by opportunists and ne'er-do-wells. Cattle rustlers helped themselves to unattended livestock. Highwaymen waylaid stagecoaches and solitary travelers. Swindlers worked fraudulent land schemes. Unscrupulous merchants jacked up prices on essential goods, profiting off the desperation of their cash-strapped customers. For those on the receiving end of such predations, there was often little recourse. Even if the perpetrators were identified, lack of evidence or witnesses could make prosecution difficult. Seeking justice on one's own was a risky affair that could easily escalate into a cycle of retribution. In this tenuous climate, having a reputation as someone not to be trifled with could provide a measure of security. Perhaps no one embodied this better than Mary Fields, better known as Stagecoach Mary. Born into slavery in Tennessee in 1832, she made her way west after the Civil War and eventually settled in the rough-and-tumble town of Cascade, Montana. Fields was a formidable woman, 6 feet tall and strong-built, as an ox from years of hard labor. She worked as a freight hauler and mail carrier, earning a reputation for toughness and dependability in a role usually reserved for men. She was also renowned for her short temper and fearlessness in the face of danger. According to one oft-repeated story, Fields got into a dispute with a hired gun at a local saloon. The man made the mistake of publicly insulting her race and character. She challenged him to a duel then and there. When the time came to face off, the gunman lost his nerve and fled town rather than exchange shots with the imposing woman. The incident only burnished Fields' aura of invincibility. But even a figure as redoubtable as Stagecoach Mary could not change the fact that violence was an ever-present part of frontier life. In a world where the laws against murder, assault, and robbery were spottily enforced at best, people put a lot of stock in projecting strength and not backing down from confrontations, lest they be painted as an easy target. Guns and knives were everyday accoutrements, carried openly and at the ready. Even school teachers and preachers often wore sidearms in the course of their duties. A quick draw and good aim were considered essential survival skills. Children grew up learning how to ride, shoot, and fight out of necessity. With so many armed and edgy individuals in close quarters, it didn't take much to spark violence. Drunken saloon arguments, card game disputes, and bruised egos could all lead otherwise upstanding citizens to start shooting or stabbing one another at the drop of a Stetson hat. The results were both tragic and sadly predictable. Such was the case in the 1870s Lincoln County, New Mexico, where an economic rivalry spiraled into a full-blown miniature civil war. The trouble started when a young Englishman named John Tunstall moved to the area and opened a general store and cattle operation. This put him in direct competition with the entrenched monopoly of the Murphy-Dolan faction, which controlled most of the local commerce through a combination of political connections and outright intimidation. Tensions simmered until 1878, when Tunstall was murdered by a posse of gunmen affiliated with Murphy-Dolan. This shocking crime galvanized Tunstall's ranch hands and sympathizers, who formed a vigilante group known as the Regulators to avenge his death. Among the Regulators' members was none other than William McCarty, better known to history as Billy the Kid. Then, only 18 years old, the charismatic gunslinger would become one of the most notorious figures of the Lincoln County War, as he and the others targeted Murphy Dolan men with impunity. Over the next few months, bloody skirmishes and assassinations rocked the county as the two sides battled for control. The violence finally subsided after newly appointed Sheriff Pat Garrett hunted down and killed several of the Regulators, including Billy the Kid. In the end, nearly 24 men had lost their lives over what amounted to a business dispute and clash of egos. While the Lincoln County War stood out for its scope and duration, it was far from an isolated incident. Range wars, feuds, and bushwhackings occurred with depressing regularity across the frontier, leaving a trail of bullet-riddled corpses and shattered families in their wake. For many, survival meant becoming inured to a level of brutality that would shock the sensibilities of their more sheltered eastern cousins. But even those who avoided being drawn into such overt conflicts often had to contend with the ever-present spectre of death in their daily struggles to eke out a living. In an era before mechanization, the work required to build and sustain a life on the frontier was backbreaking and fraught with dangers. Consider the hardscrabble lot of a homesteader trying to turn virgin prairie into a working farm. First, the sod had to be broken with a heavy iron plough pulled by a team of oxen or mules. This was slow, punishing work under the hot sun, with clouds of insects swarming any exposed skin. A man could spend weeks doing nothing but guiding the plough back and forth, wrenching out the thick tangle of grass roots to prepare the soil for planting. If he was lucky enough to get his crops in the ground before the short growing season ended, the farmer then had to pray that drought, hail, or locusts didn't destroy his harvest. A single failed crop could spell doom for a cash-strapped settler family with no reserves to fall back on. Even a good yield was no guarantee of comfort, as the long trip to the nearest market town left perishable produce vulnerable to spoilage. Livestock operations were hardly less grueling or chancy. Open-range grazing meant cattle had to be constantly monitored and defended against predators, rustlers, and sudden prairie storms. During the long cattle drives to the railheads, cowboys spent 18-hour days in the saddle, herding temperamental longhorns across sun-baked plains. At night, they contended with stampedes, rattlesnakes, and marauding coyotes while bedding down on the hard ground. When boredom or loneliness got the better of them, cowhands with more daring than sense often engaged in reckless tests of skill like riding the blind, where a rider would spur his horse to a gallop, then attempt to crawl under its belly and emerge on the other side without falling off. Such stunts provided momentary thrills, but added to the already high toll of injury and death that pervaded the cattle industry. Still, for those hardy enough to endure its rigors, the cowboy life offered a level of egalitarianism that was rare for the time. On the long trail, a man's worth was measured by his grit and abilities rather than his pedigree or skin color. Black, white, Hispanic, and Native American drovers all worked side by side and relied on one another for mutual survival. This was the world in which Nat Love made his name as one of the most famous African-American cowboys of the Old West. Born into slavery in 1854 Tennessee, Love headed west as a teenager after the Civil War to seek opportunity and adventure. He found work as a cowpoke on the vast cattle ranges of Texas and Arizona, earning a reputation as a top hand and expert marksman. Love's prowess in the saddle and with a six-shooter made him a minor celebrity on the frontier. He claimed to have won shooting contests against the likes of Bat Masterson and Billy the Kid. He also performed in some of the early Wild West shows that mythologized cowboy culture for Eastern audiences. But even a figure as respected as Love couldn't escape the dangers and indignities that came with being a person of color in the post-Civil War era. He wrote in his autobiography of nearly being lynched by a racist mob in Dodge City, Kansas, and of constantly having to assert his right to equal treatment in a society that still viewed black men as second-class citizens, at best. Love survived these perils and prejudices and eventually settled into a quieter life as a Pullman porter on the railroads. But his story serves as a reminder that even in the relatively fluid social order of the frontier, the burdens of race and class were never far from the surface. For all the hardships that men like Love endured in pursuit of their Western dreams, the plight of women on the frontier could be even more precarious. In a male-dominated society where physical strength and force of arms often define the social order, women were frequently left vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. Some, like Olive Oatman, found themselves thrust into harrowing circumstances through no fault of their own. In 1851, 14-year-old Oatman was traveling west with her Mormon family when their wagon train was attacked by a group of Native Americans in present-day Arizona. Her parents and 4 siblings were killed in the raid, while Olive and her younger sister, Mary Ann, were abducted. The girls spent the next year as captives of the Yavapai people before being traded to the neighboring Mojave tribe. There, they were initially treated with kindness and even adopted into the chief's family. But when a severe drought struck the region, Mary Ann perished from starvation along with many Mojaves. Olive survived and was eventually ransomed back to white society after 5 years with the tribe. She bore the distinctive blue chin tattoo that the Mojave women had given her as a mark of belonging. This, combined with the sensational nature of her ordeal, made her an object of fascination and pity in the popular press. Oatman spent the rest of her life grappling with the trauma of her experience and her uneasy position between 2 cultures. She gave lectures about her captivity to eager audiences, but was haunted by the loss of her family and the complex feelings she had for the Mojave people who had become her adopted kin. Her tale underscores the bleak reality that for many women, the Western frontier was a place of loneliness, grief, and difficult compromises. Even those who hadn't endured such dramatic torments often found themselves struggling to maintain their physical and mental health in the isolation and privations of the frontier. In an age before modern medicine, even common ailments could quickly turn deadly if left untreated. Diseases like smallpox, cholera, typhoid, and diphtheria cut swaths through settler communities, particularly in the early days before the advent of vaccines and public sanitation measures. Pregnancies were risky ordeals, often handled by overworked midwives, without access to clean water or proper medical supplies. As a result, maternal and infant mortality rates were heartbreakingly high. Accidents and injuries were another fact of life in a world where heavy machinery and large livestock were ubiquitous. A misplaced step or inattentive moment could result in shattered bones, severed limbs, or crushed organs. With doctors few and far between, the victims of such misfortunes often faced a grim choice between a lingering incapacitation or a gruesome amateur amputation. Even those lucky enough to avoid such dramatic harm were ground down by the chronic pains and health problems that came with rural poverty. Malnutrition, rotting teeth, festering wounds, broken backs, addictions to crude painkillers. These were the quiet agonies that etched themselves on the bodies and minds of a population perpetually teetering on the brink. Some hardy souls did their best to alleviate the suffering of their fellow travelers, even at great personal cost. One such figure was Martha Jane Canary, better known as Calamity Jane. An orphan-turned frontierswoman, Canary made a name for herself as a hard-drinking, straight-shooting character in the boomtowns of Montana and the Dakotas. But beneath her rough exterior beat the heart of a compassionate nurse who never shied away from tending to the sick and dying. during a devastating smallpox outbreak in the late 1870s, Canary worked tirelessly to comfort those stricken by the disease, even after contracting it herself. She survived, but the ordeal left her permanently weakened and prone to the alcoholism that would plague her for the rest of her life. Canary's story is a poignant reminder of the toll that frontier life could take, even on the most resilient of spirits. For every Calamity Jane who managed to eke out a measure of fame and independence in the Wild West, there were countless others who succumbed to despair, addiction, or simple exhaustion in the face of unrelenting adversity. And few faced greater adversity than the Native American tribes who found their ancestral lands and ways of life under assault by the westward expansion of the United States. From the moment the first wagon trains set out along the Oregon Trail, the delicate balance that had sustained the indigenous peoples of the Great Plains and Rocky Mountains for generations began to unravel. The most immediate threat came in the form of epidemic diseases like smallpox and measles, which the settlers inadvertently introduced to populations with no natural immunity. These microscopic invaders scythed through tribal groups, killing up to 90% of some communities. The survivors were left reeling, their social structures and knowledge systems decimated overnight. As if this wasn't devastating enough, the tribes also had to contend with the insatiable appetite of the growing United States for new land and resources. In a series of lopsided treaties, the federal government coerced native leaders into ceding vast swaths of territory in exchange for paltry annuities and assurances of protection that were often quickly abandoned. When some tribes resisted these incursions, they were met with overwhelming military force. The Indian Wars of the mid to late 19th century pitted lightly armed warriors against a modern army equipped with repeating rifles and artillery. The outcome of these conflicts was as tragic as it was inevitable. Even tribes that sought accommodation fared little better in the end. The Southern Ute people of present day. As we've seen, life on the western frontier was certainly no picnic. The legendary gunslingers, cowboys, and pioneer folk we mythologize in popular culture did in fact exist, but their day-to-day lives were marked by unrelenting hardship that's difficult for us to fully comprehend today. Take, for example, the harrowing ordeal of the Donner Party. In 1846, this ill-fated group of migrants set out from Illinois in a wagon train bound for California, hoping to make a fresh start out west. Led by George Donner and James F. Reed, the party started their journey dangerously late in the year with minimal provisions. After opting for a largely untested new route and getting delayed by a series of mishaps, they found themselves trapped in the snowy Sierra Nevada mountains as winter closed in. Out of food and unable to progress or retreat, the Donner Party's grim fate is the stuff of macabre legend. Survivors resorted to cannibalism, eating their pack animals, and even the frozen bodies of their fallen comrades in a desperate attempt to stay alive. Only 48 out of the original 87 members lived to tell the tale come springtime. While the Donner Party's plight is certainly an extreme example, it illustrates the perils of underestimating the brutality of the frontier and how quickly one false move could spell disaster. For those who did make it out to far-flung settlements, law and order were distant concepts. In the early days, it could take months or years for a US Marshal to be appointed to a new territory. Even then, effective law enforcement was a tall order, given the sheer vastness of the West. Matters of justice were often settled at the barrel of a gun. Vigilante posses, blood feuds, and score-settling violence were just a part of life. One larger-than-life figure who knew this reality all too well was stagecoach Mary Fields. Born into slavery in Tennessee around 1832, Fields gained her freedom after the Civil War and headed west, eventually settling in the rough-and-tumble town of Cascade, Montana. She earned her nickname for her reliability in operating a mail stagecoach route, as she was a crack shot with a rifle and afraid of no one. Fields had a prodigious capacity for hard liquor and a hot temper to match. She was notorious for her frequent barroom brawls and for shooting holes in the hats of those who crossed her. One particularly legendary incident occurred when a hired gun came to town, intent on killing her. But Fields was not one to back down from a fight. As the story goes, when the assassin burst into the saloon guns blazing, Fields calmly set down her glass of whiskey, drew her trusty six-shooter, and put a bullet square between the man's eyes before he could get off a single shot. A testament to her formidable reputation as someone not to be trifled with. It's said that she then sat back down and finished her drink as if nothing had happened. Fields lived to be 82 years old, a ripe old age by the standards of her day. While Stagecoach Mary's flamboyant persona is the stuff of Western legend, it also reflects the kind of grit, toughness, and force of will that was required for a woman, especially a woman of color, to survive and thrive in the face of frontier adversity. This theme of struggling against long odds and eking out an existence is one that crops up again and again in the soul-stirring tales of the Old West. It certainly rings true in the hard-fought life of Nat Love, born into slavery near Nashville, Tennessee in 1854. Love's father fled to fight for the Union Army during the Civil War and was killed in the Battle of Murfreesboro when Nat was only 8 years old. After the war, Nat headed west to seek his fortune, eventually finding work as a ranch hand in Dodge City, Kansas. He quickly earned a reputation as an expert marksman and one of the most skilled horsemen around. Love spent some 20 years as a cowboy driving cattle on the epic long-distance treks up the Chisholm Trail, from Texas to the railheads in Kansas. This was a grueling job, on the saddle for 18 hours a day in searing heat, freezing cold, and raging thunderstorms. Injury and death from stampedes, rattlesnake bites, and clashes with cattle rustlers were constant risks. But for a young black man in the Reconstruction era, it was one of the few paths to make a living and prove one's mettle. Nat Love experienced his fair share of run-ins and close shaves. On one cattle drive, his horse stepped into a prairie dog hole and somersaulted on top of him, breaking Love's shoulder and several ribs. He bound himself up and rode for 2 more days in excruciating pain to get the herd to market before seeking a doctor. Another time, Love got into a 7-hour-long shootout with would-be thieves from the safety of a washhouse, mowing down several of them with his Winchester rifle. Even by the rough-hewn standards of the frontier, cowboys like Nat Love faced discrimination and additional hardships as men of color. Though perhaps a quarter of working cowboys at the time were African American, their stories have often been whitewashed from the popular narratives and iconography of the Wild West. Love hung up his spurs for good in 1889 and married his wife Alice, living out a quieter existence as a railroad porter. Though proudly self-reliant to a fault, even the toughest hombres could only endure so many years of broken bones, bullet wounds, and brushes with death. Love captured his colorful life story in his 1907 autobiography, Life and Adventures of Nat Love, better known in the cattle country as Deadwood Dick. So what do the sagas of hardy souls like the Donner Party, Stagecoach Mary Fields, and Nat Love tell us about life in the Wild West? First and foremost, they underscore just how tenuous and fragile the grip on survival really was. For the men and women who ventured out to settle this untamed land, each new day dawned with a sense of peril and uncertainty. Misfortune, violence, and even death were constant companions. The price of admission for chasing the frontier dream. What's remarkable is that even in the face of such unforgiving circumstances, these Western trailblazers managed to persevere through sheer force of will. They were made of sterner stuff than we can hardly imagine, battle-hardened by unimaginable trauma and tough as leather from a lifetime of struggling against the elements. The fact that they carved out any existence at all is a testament to the indomitable spirit that animated the American West. Of course, the very same qualities of rugged individualism, self-sufficiency, and deep mistrust of outside authority that enabled survival on the frontier also sowed the seeds for some of the darker chapters in Western history. The lawlessness of the Wild West was a double-edged sword, liberating for those who had the grit and firepower to impose their own versions of rough justice, but also profoundly destabilizing for communities and deadly for the vulnerable. Perhaps nowhere was this tension thrown into starker relief than in 1878 in Lincoln County, New Mexico. What started as a business rivalry between local cattle barons and mercantile owners escalated into a full-blown shooting war, marked by ambushes, lynchings, and bloody gun battles that left dozens dead and forever shaped the region's history. The so-called Lincoln County War captured the nation's imagination and launched the legends of famous frontier figures like Billy the Kid and Sheriff Pat Garrett. The roots of the conflict trace back to the immense power held by a mercantile outfit called the House, which operated as a sprawling monopoly and the de facto government of Lincoln County in the absence of other civic institutions. Irish immigrant James Dolan and his partner John Riley strong-armed local ranchers and farmers, often with the help of the corrupt local sheriff, forcing them to buy all their goods from the House at extortionate prices and seizing their land and cattle if they couldn't pay. Opposition to Dolan and Riley's iron-fisted rule started brewing among settlers, particularly an English cattle rancher named John Tunstall and a young ambitious lawyer named Alexander McSween. In 1877, they set up a rival store in the town of Lincoln and began encouraging farmers to source their supplies there instead, setting the stage for an epic power struggle. Tensions exploded into violence in February 1878 when Sheriff William Brady dispatched a posse to attach Tunstall's horses to settle a trumped-up debt. When Tunstall protested, he was shot dead on the spot, igniting a furious backlash and cries for retribution against Dolan, Riley, and their corrupt law enforcement cronies. Tunstall's ranch hands, a ragtag bunch of gunslingers led by a charismatic outlaw named Billy the Kid, were deputized and sent to hunt down his killers. Thus began a bloody tit-for-tat guerrilla war marked by revenge killings, nighttime raids, and deadly ambushes between the two factions that came to be known as the Regulators and the Dolan-Riley Gang, or the House. Over the next several months, dozens were killed in the clashes. In the most infamous incident, newly appointed Sheriff Pat Garrett holed up in McSween's house in Lincoln, which was surrounded by 50 of Dolan's heavily armed men. On the 5th day of the siege, the defenders set the house ablaze, sending the occupants fleeing. McSween and several others were gunned down as they ran out, while Billy the Kid narrowly escaped by stealing a horse. The Lincoln County War petered out by the end of 1878, but its aftershocks would reverberate for years to come. It launched Billy the Kid to nationwide notoriety and a crime spree that would only end when his erstwhile friend Pat Garrett hunted him down and killed him in 1881. More broadly, it came to symbolize both the romance and anarchy of the frontier, a place where business beefs become blood feuds, and the line between lawmen and outlaws was paper-thin. The West's untamed reputation also proved to be a siren song for larger-than-life characters seeking redemption and reinvention, perhaps none more famous than Calamity Jane. Born Martha Cannery in 1852 Missouri, Jane gravitated to the frontier as a young woman, working a variety of odd jobs from dance hall girl to oxen team driver. She earned her memorable moniker, as she would later recount, after rescuing a certain Captain Egan when his horse was shot out from under him during a skirmish with Native Americans, braving a hail of bullets to lift him onto her own horse and spirit him to safety. Reflecting with her trademark wit on the episode, Jane mused that, "I named my pistol and rifle Calamity and Jane thereafter, in honor of the occasion." Like many of her contemporaries, Calamity Jane's biography is an elusive patchwork, equal parts fact and larger-than-life folklore. She was known for wearing men's clothing, being handy with a gun, and for her often vulgar, hard-drinking persona. By her own telling, she was an ace scout who rode with Custer's cavalry, though historians deem this unlikely. Her reputation was such that she became a popular subject of dime store novels and sensationalized newspaper accounts in her own lifetime. What's indisputable is that Calamity Jane left an indelible impression on the frontier camps and mining towns she drifted through, not least during the smallpox epidemic that ravaged the Black Hills around Deadwood, South Dakota in 1878. Jane rolled up her sleeves and spent long, thankless weeks as a nurse, tending to the sick and dying at all hours, making soup and cleaning bedpans, even as others fled in terror of contracting the vicious disease. This was hazardous, exhausting work, even for battle-tested frontier folk. Highly contagious and spread by coughing, smallpox would cause high fevers, uncontrollable shaking, and a rash of fluid-filled boils so painful that sufferers said it felt like they were being burned alive. Up to a third of those infected died. In an era before vaccines, it could tear through whole communities in a matter of weeks. For Calamity Jane and others like her who stepped into the breach, it was all they could do to provide palliative care and a small measure of dignity and companionship to the afflicted in their final hours. She was no Florence Nightingale. By all accounts, Jane had a filthy mouth, an explosive temper, and a prodigious appetite for whiskey. But her selfless service earned her the undying gratitude and respect of Deadwood's residents. Jane's rough and tumble life would catch up with her, and she died at age 51. Her health broken down by chronic alcoholism and a hard-knock frontier existence. Perhaps fittingly for a woman who straddled the blurred lines between fact and fiction, Calamity Jane had a self-aggrandizing streak and was known for her tall tales, once bragging she could outdrink, outshoot, outride, and throw down any man in the West. But one claim she made with conviction shortly before her death rang true. Reflecting on her time nursing smallpox patients in Deadwood, Jane said simply, "There are some things in my life I'm not proud of, but this is one thing I am." For all her carousing and rabble-rousing when crisis came calling, Calamity Jane showed her true mettle, doing the dangerous, unglamorous work of trying to hold her community together. Indeed, if the frontier was a place of stark brutality and hair-trigger violence, it was also a realm where the fundamental decency and selflessness of the human spirit could shine through in unexpected ways. Settlers banded together to raise barns and share provisions with needy neighbors. Lawmen like Wyatt Earp and Wild Bill Hickok, for all their rough edges, risked their necks to bring a semblance of order to wild and woolly mining camps. Still, for every tender mercy of human charity, it seemed there was some countervailing act of cruelty or misfortune waiting around the bend. Indigenous tribes in particular found their worlds shattered by the relentless press of white settlement across the Western Territories. Far from the noble savages of popular imagination, they were complex and diverse societies with ancient traditions and rich cultural legacies. But to the US government and land-hungry pioneers, they were all too often seen as little more than an impediment to progress, leading to policies of forced removal, containment on reservations, and in some cases, outright extermination. Few episodes capture the tragic dimensions of this fateful clash of civilizations more poignantly than the story of Black Hawk, the warrior chief of the Ute tribe of central Utah. By the 1860s, after decades of tenuous coexistence with Mormon settlers, tensions were at a breaking point. A series of skirmishes and escalating retaliations came to a head in the spring of 1865, in what became known as the Black Hawk War. Facing food shortages and seeing their traditional hunting grounds shrink due to overhunting and drought, Black Hawk led a campaign of cattle raids against Mormon settlements across the San Pete and Sevier valleys. While the chief insisted his aim was merely to feed his starving people, not to kill settlers, The raids quickly escalated into a cycle of violence as militia volunteers and US cavalry mobilized to pursue and punish the Utes. Over the next 2 years, Black Hawk and his band of fighters managed to hold their own against the superior numbers and armaments of their opponents, staging ambushes from mountain hideouts and stealing livestock at will. But it was a lopsided fight they could not sustain. By the fall of 1867, with his followers decimated by hunger and battlefield losses, Black Hawk sued for peace. In the ensuing negotiations, the chief secured promises from the federal government for protected reservation lands and regular food distributions for his people. But in a sad echo of countless other treaties, these would prove to be empty assurances. In the years to come, the Utes would be relegated to desolate, unproductive reservations plagued by poverty, disease, and despair, forced to rely on meagre and often rotten government rations. A once proud and vibrant people saw their cultural vitality ebb away along with their economic and political autonomy. Even the great Chief Black Hawk would die a broken man just 3 years later in 1870 at the age of 41, his world irrevocably shattered, the roots of his identity severed, his spirit depleted by the struggle to hold his community together in the face of overwhelming loss. The Old West was nothing if not replete with such tales of shining potential and promise swallowed up in the maw of frontier brutality. And yet, even in the face of such unrelenting adversity, the stubborn flame of human resilience and ingenuity refused to be snuffed out entirely. Take the remarkable story of El Fuego Baca, the son of Mexican immigrants who became a living legend of the Southwest for his grit, cunning, and sheer audacity in the face of overwhelming odds. Baca was working as a young ranch hand and aspiring lawman in the New Mexico Territory in 1884 when he happened upon a mob of some 80 cowboys terrorizing a Mexican-American farmer accused of stealing one of their horses. Though outnumbered 80-1, Baca stepped in to arrest the ringleader for the disturbance. But when the justice of the peace released the cowboy on account of his political connections, all hell broke loose. Enraged, the mob gave Baca just 5 minutes to flee town or be shot on sight. But the Donner Party's tragic tale is one of the most infamous in the history of the Wild West, a stark testament to the dangers and hardships that pioneers faced on the long overland journey across America. In the spring of 1846, George Donner and his brother Jacob led a wagon train of 87 settlers out from Illinois, bound for the fertile farmlands of California. Lured by the promise of a shorter route called the Hastings Cutoff, they fatefully opted to diverge from the established Oregon Trail. The shortcut proved disastrous. The terrain was unforgiving, rocky, narrow, and choked with brush. They had to hack their way through dense wilderness and struggle over treacherous mountain passes. Wagon axles broke, oxen died of exhaustion, and precious provisions dwindled. As the weeks dragged on and snow began to fall, their pace slowed to a crawl. By the time they reached the high Sierras, it was already November. Winter came early that year, trapping them in its icy grip near the frozen banks of Truckee Lake. Attempts to breach the pass proved futile against towering snowdrifts. Huddled in makeshift cabins, the starving party was forced to confront a terrible choice: remain and risk certain death, or set out on foot and face the howling blizzard. Many did not survive that brutal winter in the mountains. Sickness and frostbite took their toll. Some escaped on homemade snowshoes, braving sub-zero temperatures in a desperate bid for help. In the camps, the remnants ate twigs, strips of leather, and famously human flesh to ward off starvation. It was a ghastly scene of gnawed bones and emaciated faces, like something out of a nightmare. When rescuers finally arrived in February 1847, only 48 skeletal survivors remained, more than half the party having perished. Their gruesome ordeal sent shockwaves through the nation and remains a haunting cautionary tale to this day. But while the Donner Party's fate was exceptionally grim, in many ways, it represents the countless untold stories of pioneers who set out to tame the Wild West, only to be defeated by its merciless landscapes. For the frontier, beyond its sweeping vistas and stirring sunsets, was a crucible that tested the mettle of all who dared traverse it. Death stalked the wagon trains at every turn, from drowning at river crossings to perishing of thirst on the scorching alkali flats. The soil, baked hard as concrete by the unrelenting sun, resisted even the most determined farmer's plough. Livestock wandered off in the night, or were picked off by ravenous wolves. There was a stark scarcity of the basic necessities of life. Wood for fires and shelter was a precious commodity on the barren plains. Safe, drinkable water was often a maddening mirage, with settlers sometimes forced to strain viscous liquid from mud puddles or pay exorbitant prices for a swig from a sullied stream. And in times of drought, even those meagre sources evaporated. Food was an ever-present concern, with malnutrition and starvation constant threats. The eastern forests and fields, teeming with game, must have seemed a distant memory as pioneers scoured the brush for scrawny jackrabbits or prairie dogs to fill their porridge pots. When locusts descended in hellish black clouds, they stripped the land bare in minutes, leaving destitute families to subsist on candle wax and boiled leather. In this unforgiving environment, it took only a small twist of fate to spell calamity. A lame ox or a broken axle could doom a settler family, stranding them alone on the vast, hostile prairie. A sudden thunderstorm could send canyons flashing with deadly torrents or a prairie fire stampeding over the horizon, forcing desperate refugees to take shelter in rivers or root cellars. And through it all, there was the brooding, elemental presence of the mountains, canyons, and deserts, impervious to the suffering of the frail creatures struggling at their feet. The land itself seemed to wage a war of attrition on the pioneers, eroding their resolve with every passing mile. Is it any wonder that so many fell by the wayside, their graves marked by hastily made crosses, or sometimes nothing at all? This was the world that greeted those early homesteaders, beautiful and cruel, with tragedy lurking behind every rocky outcropping and sun-dappled copse of trees. A world where even the strongest, best-prepared travelers could be cut down in an instant by the caprice of Mother Nature, where one bad decision, like that of the Donner Party, could set in motion a chain of events that ended in catastrophe. Some pioneers did eventually break through, of course. Battered and bruised, they planted crops, raised livestock, and hewn log cabins from the stubborn earth. They created the first fragile threads of civilization in the western wilds. But their success was bought with an ocean of blood, sweat, and tears, paid out mile by grueling mile. We remember the likes of Lewis and Clark, but there were nameless thousands who were swallowed up by the pitiless frontier, never to be seen again. Their stories may be lost to history, but they whisper to us still across the ages, in the ghostly ruins of a sod house on the Nebraska prairie, in the seared names on a sun-bleached wagon tongue in the Mojave Desert, and yes, in the wind that keens through the jagged peaks of Truckee Pass, where the Donner Party met its terrible fate. They remind us that for every legendary mountain man and intrepid pioneer, there were untold numbers who paid the ultimate price in loneliness, toil, and suffering. This, then, was the dark underside of manifest destiny, the human toll exacted by the grand westward expansion. We are right to celebrate the courage and grit of those who built a nation from sea to shining sea, but we do their memory a disservice if we forget the brutal calculus at the heart of it all. For every wagon train that rolled into the sunset, another was lost, broken down, and abandoned on the vast and pitiless frontier. As we pull a blanket up to our chin in our cozy modern homes, it's hard to conceive of the hardships the pioneers endured just to eke out a meager existence. The Wild West has long since been tamed, its perils reduced to the stuff of Hollywood westerns and campfire tales. But there was a time, not so long ago, when to set out across that untamed expanse was to roll the dice with fate itself. A time when every day was a battle for survival and every mile a hard-won victory. So let us pause and spare a thought for those who braved that lonely, desolate trail. The ones who didn't make it. The dreamers and drifters, the families huddled in the night against the wolves in the cold. They may have been lost to history, but their struggles and sacrifices echo down to us through the ages. In the taming of the Wild West, it was they who paid the highest price of all. It's easy now to be seduced by the romance of the American frontier, the cowboys and the gold rush, the untamed wilderness stretching out beneath an endless sky. But the reality for those early pioneers was far harsher than any storybook tale. Unforgiving landscapes and Mother Nature's furious outbursts were just some of the challenges they faced. For even greater dangers often came from their fellow man. Without the stabilizing hand of government and law enforcement, a different kind of wildness held sway on the frontier. In remote outposts and boom towns, justice was often meted out at the end of a gun barrel by whomever was quickest on the draw. The code of the West was a flimsy deterrent against the baser impulses of avaricious and violent men. And so it was that the wagon trains and homesteads fell prey, not just to calamities of nature, but to the rapaciousness of opportunists and sociopaths. Hardened gunslingers, fresh from the killing fields of the Civil War, hired themselves out as enforcers and assassins. Scheming cattle barons and land speculators used fraud, intimidation, and outright murder to expand their empires. Through it all, the institutions of civilization were slow to take hold. Courthouses and jails were few and far between on the vast frontier. US marshals and local sheriffs, outnumbered and outgunned, struggled to maintain even a semblance of order. In the absence of formal authority, vigilante justice became the law of the land. For the vulnerable and disenfranchised, minorities, single women, small ranchers, and farmers, life on the frontier was especially fraught. They were easy marks for the unscrupulous, with little recourse against those who would rob, cheat, or physically abuse them. The fledgling court system offered scant protection, with land claims routinely thrown out, and juries often afraid to convict dangerous outlaws. In the face of such pervasive lawlessness, settlers were left largely to fend for themselves. Many took up arms in self-defense, going about their daily business, with a weather eye always open for trouble. Disputes between neighbors frequently escalated into deadly feuds and vendettas that stretched on for generations. It was a land where a man's worth was often measured by his skill with a six-shooter. Even the bonds of family offered little respite in this dog-eat-dog environment. Husbands abandoned wives to seek their fortune in the gold fields. Fathers pressed sons into service as farmhands and ranch workers from the time they could walk. Children were expected to grow up fast and pull their weight, with little time for play or sentimentality. Perhaps no one embodied this hard-scrabble existence more than stagecoach Mary Fields. Born into slavery in Tennessee in 1832, Fields made her way west after the Civil War, working as a groundskeeper at a convent school in Toledo, Ohio. In 1895, at the age of 63, she settled in Cascade, Montana, and took a job hauling freight and mail by stagecoach. It was perilous work for anyone, let alone an elderly black woman in a frontier town. Fields faced down bandits, blizzards and rugged mountain passes with a steely resolve, earning a reputation as one of the most reliable drivers in the territory. She also garnered fame for her toughness off the trail, reportedly besting any man who dared challenge her to a fight. One story tells of a hired gun who made the mistake of crashing Mary's birthday party and starting trouble. She calmly left the room, fetched her trusty six-shooter, and returned to plug the man right between the eyes. When the smoke cleared, she's said to have gone right on back to her cake, leaving the dead body sprawled on the saloon floor. Tales like this, while perhaps embellished over time, speak to the sheer grit and tenacity it took for Mary Fields and others like her to survive in the Wild West. For women and minorities especially, every day was a battle against not just the elements, but the prejudices and predations of their fellow man. They had to be tough as nails and twice as smart, just to make it through to sundown. Fields worked the Cascade route for 8 years, earning the respect of cowboys and stagecoach passengers alike. In her rare time off, she indulged her softer side, tending to her beloved garden and baking fresh bread for local baseball games. She was a formidable presence right up until her death in 1914, a symbol of the strength and resilience of frontier women. In a sense, Stagecoach Mary was fortunate. She managed to eke out a living and a modicum of independence in a time and place where the deck was heavily stacked against her. For every Mary Fields, there were countless others ground down by the implacable gears of frontier justice. Women left alone and destitute when their husbands died in the mines. Chinese laborers driven out of town by angry mobs, their life's work stolen out from under them. Homesteaders bullied off their land by corrupt ranchers and railroad men. These were the forgotten casualties of the Wild West, the ones who bore the brunt of the lawlessness and predation that festered on the fringes of civilization. Their stories, often lost to history, are a reminder of the dark undercurrents that churned beneath the surface of the frontier. Behind the tales of gold strikes and cattle drives beat the faint and fading hearts of the dispossessed. Of course, violence and vigilantism weren't the only hazards settlers faced. Even those who steered well clear of gunslingers and range wars found plenty of other ways to die in the untamed West. From dangerous working conditions to rampant disease, the Grim Reaper wore many masks on the frontier. Consider the plight of the hard rock miners who swarmed the western hills in search of gold and silver. They spent their days toiling in dank, claustrophobic tunnels, chipping away at the unyielding stone with pick and dynamite. Cave-ins, explosions and noxious gases were a constant threat, sending many a miner to an early grave. Even those who emerged unscathed from the earth faced a battery of health problems from long-term exposure to dust and toxins. Black lung, silicosis, and other respiratory ailments were the bane of the mining camps, leaving once strapping men gaunt and wheezing. And that was if they managed to avoid other on-the-job hazards like electrocution, drowning, or being crushed by heavy machinery. The cowpunchers who drove great herds of cattle across the plains fared little better. Long hours in the saddle left them bow-legged and saddle-sore, with chronic pain a constant companion. Stampedes, river crossings, and ornery longhorns took their toll, with many a cowboy meeting his end beneath the trampling hooves of the very animals he was hired to protect. And then there were the railroad workers, the Gandhi dancers who laid the tracks that stitched the nation together. Laboring from sunup to sundown, they endured blistering heat, numbing cold, and every extreme in between. Horrific accidents were commonplace, with errant swings of the sledgehammer smashing fingers and flying shards of metal taking out eyes. Malnutrition, exposure, and sheer exhaustion whittled away at their ranks, their bodies left in shallow graves alongside the very rails they died to build. Danger lurked even for those who never ventured near a mine shaft or cattle trail. Frontier towns were veritable petri dishes of disease, with poor sanitation and close living quarters allowing contagions to run rampant. Cholera, smallpox, diphtheria, and typhoid cut wide swathes through settler communities, sometimes wiping out entire families in a matter of days. Children were especially vulnerable, their tiny bodies no match for the onslaught of microbes and misfortune. Infants perished from milk sickness, poisoned by drinking from mothers who consumed toxic white snake root. Toddlers tumbled into uncovered wells or were trampled by runaway horses. older children succumbed to any number of untreatable maladies, from measles to scarlet fever. Medical care, such as it was, offered little relief. Frontier doctors were often little more than snake oil salesmen, their cures laced with laudanum and mercury. Surgical techniques were primitive at best, with anesthesia a rare luxury. A simple cut or broken bone could easily lead to a life-threatening infection, and childbirth was a perilous ordeal for both mother and baby. Through it all, the spectre of poverty and destitution loomed large. Many settlers arrived on the frontier with little more than the clothes on their backs, lured by the promise of free land and a fresh start. But the reality was often far harsher than the dream, with crop failures, livestock losses, and predatory lending practices conspiring to keep them mired in debt and desperation. Take the story of Olive Oatman. In 1851, at the age of 14, she set out with her Mormon family from Illinois to California, dreaming of a new life in the sun-drenched valleys out west. But tragedy struck in the Arizona desert when a band of Native Americans attacked their wagon train, slaughtering Olive's parents and 4 of her siblings before her very eyes. Olive and her younger sister Mary Ann were taken captive, traded to another tribe and enslaved for years. Mary Ann eventually perished from hunger and abuse, leaving Olive alone in a strange and terrifying world. Her face was tattooed with the distinctive blue markings of her captors, a permanent reminder of her trauma and dislocation. When Olive was finally ransomed back to white society in 1856, she found herself adrift in a culture that no longer felt like home. Whispers and stares followed her wherever she went, her tattooed face a source of morbid fascination. She struggled to readjust to frontier life, moving from town to town in search of anonymity and acceptance. Though she eventually married and started a family of her own, Olive was haunted by her experiences for the rest of her days. The physical and emotional scars of her captivity never fully healed, a testament to the enduring impact of the frontier's brutality. Hers is a story of resilience in the face of unspeakable adversity, but also of the steep price paid by so many in the quest for a better life out west. For the stark truth is that the frontier was an unforgiving place, with failure and ruin lurking around every bend. Nature's fury, man's cruelty, poverty, disease, these were the constant companions of the Western settler, exacting a heavy toll on body and spirit. Dreams. Life in the Wild West was also made brutal by the constant threat of violence that hung over every frontier town and settlement. Feuds, duels, robberies, and murders were commonplace occurrences in a time and place where the rule of law was tenuous at best. Guns and knives were ubiquitous on the western frontier. A man's skill with a revolver or rifle could very well mean the difference between life and death. Nearly everyone went armed, both for protection against bandits or hostile native war parties, and also to cultivate an aura of intimidation. There was always a looming danger that a petty slight or perceived insult could suddenly erupt into bloody violence. Saloons and gambling halls in particular were notorious hotbeds for drunken brawls and deadly shootouts. These rough establishments attracted all manner of unsavory characters: gunslingers, outlaws, car sharks, and fugitives. Alcohol flowed freely, and tempers often ran hot. It wasn't uncommon for a simple dispute over a hand of poker, or the affections of a saloon girl to lead to thrown punches, smashed bottles, and bullets flying. Many a man met his untimely end in the dim light and smoky haze of a Wild West watering hole. Perhaps no episode better exemplifies this volatile climate of violence than the infamous Lincoln County War. This bloody conflict erupted in the 1870s in the New Mexico territory town of Lincoln and the surrounding ranches and settlements. What began as a rivalry between 2 competing merchant factions, one led by the Irishman Lawrence Murphy and James Dolan, the other by the Englishman John Tunstall and his attorney Alexander McSween, soon spiraled into a vicious maelstrom of revenge killings, armed confrontations and outright anarchy. The bad blood reached a boiling point when John Tunstall was gunned down by a posse organised by Sheriff William Brady, who was firmly in the pocket of the Murphy Dolan gang. This brazen murder sparked all-out war. Tunstall's ranch hands, led by the infamous outlaw Billy the Kid, swore vengeance. Calling themselves the Regulators, they waged a guerrilla campaign against Murphy, Dolan, Brady, and their cronies. The dusty streets of Lincoln became a battlefield as the two sides clashed in a series of bloody skirmishes and ambushes. Billy the Kid and the Regulators repeatedly evaded capture, hiding out in the wilderness and striking at the Murphy-Dolan faction whenever they could. They assassinated Sheriff Brady and deputized themselves in his place, using their newfound position to hunt down their enemies. In one notorious incident, the Regulators laid siege to the McSween house, where many of Dolan's supporters had taken shelter. A furious gun battle erupted, with the Regulators firing into the house, while the surrounded men fired back from the windows and roof. The structure was eventually set ablaze, with the men still inside. McSween was shot dead while fleeing the inferno. For months, Lincoln County descended into bloody, lawless chaos, with the Regulators locked in a guerrilla war against the Dolan faction and the army troops dispatched to restore order. Killings and counter-killings became the brutal norm. The violence shocked the nation and made the New Mexico Territory a byword for frontier mayhem. Though the Lincoln County War finally ended with the defeat of the Regulators and the capture and execution of Billy the Kid, it left a long shadow over the history of the Wild West. It showcased just how quickly the forces of greed, hatred, and vengeance could plunge a frontier community into bloodshed and bedlam. For the homesteaders and townspeople caught in the crossfire, it was a terrifying lesson in the brutal realities of life on the untamed edges of civilization. Such outbreaks of violence were tragically common in the Old West. Range wars, blood feuds, and clashes between outlaws and lawmen played out with grim frequency across the frontier. Shootouts in the streets, saloons, and canyons became the stuff of dime novels and Wild West shows. But for the people who lived through such times, the reality was far darker and more brutal than any romanticized legend. The threat of sudden violence was a constant specter looming over the Wild West, as inescapable as the harsh sun and the pitiless deserts. It was a time when a man's reputation with a gun was his most valuable asset, and a single misspoken word could prove a fatal mistake. For the brave and foolhardy souls who ventured out into this unforgiving frontier, survival often depended on their quickness with a six-shooter and their ability to navigate a treacherous world where life was cheap and death could come without warning. This climate of chaos and bloodshed only compounded the many other hardships that faced those who tried to eke out an existence on the western frontier. On top of the punishing elements, the crippling isolation, and the backbreaking labor, they faced the ever-present specter of violence, knowing that their lives could be snuffed out at any moment by a bullet or a blade. It took a rare breed of grit and tenacity to persevere under such brutal circumstances. Of course, the violence of the Wild West took an especially devastating toll on the Native American tribes who had called those lands home for generations. As American settlers pushed ever further west in search of land and opportunity, it brought them into bloody conflict with the indigenous peoples. Warfare became a brutal constant along the frontier, as the US Army and pioneer militias clashed with increasingly desperate native warriors fighting to protect their ancestral homelands. Tribes found their traditional hunting grounds and sacred sites overrun by miners, ranchers, and farmers. Again and again, they were forced to sign treaties ceding their territory, only to see those agreements violated as the relentless westward expansion continued. Corrupt government agents and greedy speculators conspired to rob them of what little land they had left. Reduced to a state of destitution, they faced poverty, disease, and dwindling food sources as the buffalo herds they depended on were driven to the brink of extinction. Some fought back fiercely, unwilling to surrender their way of life without a bitter struggle. Legendary warriors like Crazy Horse, Geronimo, and Sitting Bull led their people into battle against the US Army, winning stunning victories against the odds. But for all their skill and courage, they could not hold back the tide of manifest destiny and the sheer weight of numbers as more and more settlers poured west. The saddest epitaph for the brutality of this conquest can be seen in the grim fate that befell so many once proud Native American nations. Driven from their lands, decimated by war, hunger, and disease, they were forced onto bleak, inhospitable reservations where mere survival was a daily struggle. A way of life that had endured for thousands of years was crushed in a few blood-soaked decades, ploughed under by the remorseless westward march of an expanding young nation. The tragic saga of the Ute chief Black Hawk and his people stands as a poignant example of this brutal history. The Utes had long inhabited the mountain valleys and plateaus of what is now Utah and Colorado, living in scattered bands that migrated with the seasons to hunt and forage. Contact with white settlers and prospectors brought them trade goods and better weapons, but also devastating epidemics of smallpox and other diseases that tore through their villages like wildfire. As more and more settlers encroached on Ute lands, violent clashes followed. Tensions boiled over in 1865 with the ambush and murder of a revered Ute chief called Black Bear. His young son, Black Hawk, swore vengeance on the white men. For the next several years, he led a series of daring raids against isolated ranches and wagon trains, driving off horses and cattle, burning cabins, and killing any settlers who tried to resist. His name became a byword for terror among the Colorado frontier. But Black Hawk's war against the invaders was ultimately a losing battle. In 1870, a US Army force led by Colonel Edward Canby tracked the Ute warriors deep into the mountains. In a frigid, wind-whipped canyon, they engaged in a brutal running battle with Black Hawk's band. The Utes fought fiercely, but they were heavily outnumbered and outgunned. Many were cut down by rifle fire or died of exposure as they desperately tried to escape through the snow. Black Hawk himself survived the battle, but the defeat broke his resistance. With his people starving and ravaged by disease, he had little choice but to surrender. In a solemn ceremony at the Camp Douglas Army Post, the once feared war chief handed his rifle to Colonel Canby, a symbolic act of submission. He spent his final years living on the Uinta Reservation in abject poverty and misery, a sad shadow of his former proud self. When he passed away in 1877, it was scarcely noticed beyond the confines of the bleak reservation. Black Hawk's people fared little better. Confined to the reservation, they struggled to adapt to a bleak and unfamiliar way of life. Cut off from their traditional hunting and foraging grounds, they grew dependent on paltry government rations and corrupt Indian agents who cheated and exploited them. Despair, alcoholism, and disease ran rampant. A once thriving tribe was reduced to a shattered remnant, their population dwindling year by bloody year. The tragedy of the Utes played out with grim regularity all across the West, as the Native American way of life was crushed beneath the wheels of American expansion. The conquest of a continent had come at a bitter cost in blood and suffering. For the indigenous peoples who had called those lands home for centuries, the brutality of the Wild West era was nothing short of catastrophic. Displaced, decimated, and relegated to a bleak future of hardship and decline, they paid the ultimate price for one nation's ruthless push to fulfill its manifest destiny. From the sun-scorched deserts of the Southwest to the windswept plains of Montana, the violence and bloodshed of the frontier left a long legacy of pain and loss. It was an era of unremitting brutality, when sudden death was an ever-present fact of life, and even the strongest and bravest could be cut down without warning. For the Native Americans whose ancestral lands became a battleground, it was a time of unimaginable devastation, a descent into a darkness from which many tribes would never recover. Yet for all the tragedy and horror it witnessed, the Old West also gave rise to a special breed of tenacity, resilience, and stubborn determination. Faced with challenges and ordeals that would crush lesser souls, the men and women of the frontier found the strength to endure, to pick up the pieces and begin again no matter how many times they were beaten down. They etched a place for themselves through sheer grit and iron resolve, carving homes and communities out of an unforgiving wilderness with their blood, sweat, and tears. It's important to remember this duality when we look back on the Western frontier. The dark brutality and the dogged endurance, the cruelty and the courage, the savagery and the sacrifice. The realities of life in the Wild West were far harsher and meaner than any dime novel or Hollywood Western could ever depict. But that hard struggle also forged a distinctive identity and character, a uniquely American mythos of rugged individualism and indomitable spirit that endures to this day. The violence and suffering of that era should never be forgotten, but neither should the bravery and fortitude of those who lived it. The life of El Fuego Baca is a prime example of the grit, tenacity, and sheer determination it took to survive in the Wild West. Born in Socorro, New Mexico in 1865, Baca would go on to become one of the most legendary lawmen and gunfighters of his era. As a young man, Baca worked as a cowboy and miner, already getting a taste for the hard-scrabble frontier life. But it was a fateful day in October 1884 that would cement his place in Wild West law. The 19-year-old Baca, acting in his capacity as a deputy sheriff, arrested a cowboy for shooting wildly into the air in the town of Frisco. Outraged, the cowboy's fellow ranch hands, some 80 men strong, rode into town demanding Baca release their comrade. What followed was nothing short of incredible. Baca, refusing to back down, holed up in a small adobe jacal with only a single door and window. Over the next 33 hours, the angry mob fired thousands of bullets into the tiny building. Baca returned fire judiciously, making each shot count. Amazingly, not a single bullet struck Baca, while he himself felled 4 of his attackers. After the third day, the exhausted men finally called off their assault. Baca emerged, unscathed, into the sunlight. When arrested and tried for murder, he was acquitted, with the jury finding he had acted in self-defense. The extraordinary feat catapulted Baca to instant stardom. His story spread far and wide, a young Hispanic lawman single-handedly standing down a furious lynch mob. Baca would go on to a long and storied career in law enforcement, serving as a sheriff, US Marshal, and even a lawyer. He continued to display remarkable courage in the face of mortal danger. On one occasion, after arresting 2 notorious Texas outlaws, their compatriots ambushed Baca's posse. In the 10-minute gun battle that followed, Baca was shot in the stomach. Undeterred, he kept firing until the attackers fled. Then, he calmly doctored his own wound and rode 15 miles to the nearest town to treat his injury. Such astonishing feats of bravery, resilience, and coolness under fire weren't unique to El Fuego Baca. They were characteristic of many who made the Western frontier their home in the latter half of the 19th century. The Wild West demanded a special breed. Men and women of true grit who met the constant barrage of challenges and threats with steely determination. Life in the untamed West was undoubtedly brutal. Geographic isolation, economic hardship, the ever-present spectre of violence, and myriad natural dangers conspired to make every day a battle for survival. Yet in the face of these daunting obstacles, the indomitable human spirit persisted. settlers streamed westward, lured by the promise of land, riches, and a chance at a better life. They traversed hostile landscapes, endured unforgiving climates, and carved out a tenuous existence on the frontier. It took men like Elphago Baca to impose some semblance of law and order amidst the chaos. Their stories, often more incredible than fiction, have become integral threads in the rich tapestry of American history. They speak to the qualities that have come to define the American character: rugged individualism, dogged perseverance, a willingness to stand up for what's right. Of course, the reality of the Wild West was far grittier and morally murkier than the romanticized version that's taken root in our collective imagination. The conquest of the West came at a terrible cost, particularly for Native Americans who saw their way of life shattered and their populations decimated. Lawmen like Baca may have been heroes to the settlers, but to the indigenous peoples, they were often the enforcers of a painful, unjust dislocation. The taming of the frontier was a brutal, bloody business, shot through with racism, greed, and wanton destruction. It's a past that we're still grappling with today. Yet, there's no denying the powerful allure of the Wild West mythos. In our mind's eye, it remains a place of breathtaking vistas and larger-than-life characters, a crucible that forged an enduring American identity. The very harshness of frontier existence seems to imbue it with a certain romance, a nostalgia for a time when life was simpler, starker, more elemental. Perhaps that's why tales of the Old West continue to captivate us, generations removed from that bygone era. They transport us back to a world where every man had to be tough as leather, quick on the draw, and fiercely independent. A world where the likes of Elphago Baca could attain immortality through sheer force of will and courage. As we reflect on the brutal realities that shaped the frontier experience, it's worth considering what lessons that tumultuous chapter in our history might hold for us today. In an age of comfort and convenience, the Wild West reminds us of the fortitude, adaptability, and resilience of the human spirit. It stands as a testament to the ability to endure and even thrive in the face of extreme adversity. The world may have moved on from the lawless days of the frontier, but the qualities it demanded, grit, determination, courage in the face of danger, remain as vital as ever. They are the same qualities that animate stories like that of Elphago Baca, stories that will continue to capture our imagination for generations to come. For as long as hardship exists in human experience, we will be drawing inspiration from those who overcame the worst it had to offer. And so, as we drift off to sleep, let us dream of a time when the West was still wild, a harsh, unforgiving, yet strangely compelling world. A world that challenged the very limits of human endurance and resolve. In doing so, it shaped a nation and birthed a legend. One that, for all its brutality, continues to awe and inspire us to this day. The untamed frontier may be gone, but its spirit lives on, in the rugged landscapes that bore witness to countless struggles, in the time-worn tales passed down through the ages, and in the enduring character of a people who carved a civilization from the wilds. The Wild West was many things: brutal, cruel, uncompromising. But it was never boring, and that perhaps is its most enduring legacy. So let us embrace the wildness within and without, even as we drift into the welcoming arms of slumber. For in our dreams, we are all gunslingers and trailblazers, staking our claim on a piece of untamed destiny. The frontier may be gone, but the spirit of the Wild West rides on, forever untamed, forever free. The vast prairies, sun-scorched deserts, and jagged mountain ranges that stretched out toward the horizon must have felt both exhilarating and intimidating to the early pioneers who ventured westward. With little more than a covered wagon full of supplies, a few farm animals, and an unshakable spirit of determination, these settlers struck out in search of opportunity and a better life in the untamed frontier. But the wilderness of the American West was not quick to yield its bounty. Beneath the sweeping vistas and stirring landscapes, dangers and hardships lurked around every bend. Biting winds whipped across the plains, scouring exposed skin raw. In summer, the merciless sun bore down until the earth cracked and the horizon shimmered in the heat. Away from the comforts and convenience of established towns back east, resources that were once taken for granted became precious and scarce. Firewood to stave off the chill of night and cook what meagre food could be scrounged had to be gathered by hand from sparse vegetation or carried for miles. Clean, drinkable water was never a guarantee, as settlers quickly learned that even crystal-clear streams could harbour debilitating or deadly bacteria. Sickness rippled through many a wagon train when a communal barrel was unknowingly tainted with cholera. For the early westward migrants along the Oregon Trail in the 1840s and 50s, this inhospitable landscape was first experienced in the joyless expanse of the Great Plains. After leaving the relative lushness around the Missouri River, wagon trains soon reached a point where the rolling prairies unfurled to the horizon in an endless, hypnotic sea of grass. At first, the open space must have felt liberating, without fences or property lines boxing them in. But that elation gradually withered into a gnawing sense of exposure and vulnerability under the boundless sky. Settlers were utterly unshielded from the elemental forces of nature, the relentless sun, desiccating winds, plagues of ravenous insects. In her diary, pioneer Amelia Knight captured the disheartening experience of crossing such desolate country. Saw our first buffalo. There is nothing here but barren plains as far as the eye can see, with scarcely a tree or shrub. We are all nearly worn out and getting weak, but we must keep on. As dispiriting as the Great Plains could be, the truly arduous leg of the westward journey was yet to come. Looming beyond the prairies stood the Rocky Mountains, a seemingly impenetrable wall of soaring peaks and plunging canyons. The sight of their towering snow-capped heights was a shock to weary travelers. Amelia Knight wrote of her crushing dismay upon reaching the Rockies on July 19, 1853. Had a view of the mountains. They looked terrible to me, so high and steep and rocky. Went a short distance over hills so steep that it was all we could do to walk and carry the babies. Crossing this daunting mountain barrier was fraught with danger and plagued by setbacks. Wagons overloaded with supplies strained up punishing inclines, only to hurtle down treacherous descents where one slip could spell disaster. Narrow passes became choked with boulders, dislodged by the heavy traffic. Unseasonable blizzards at high elevation could maroon pioneers for weeks and doom their emaciated cattle. Hundreds met their end from injury, exposure, and starvation in the Rockies before ever reaching the promised land of Oregon or California. Even hardy souls who finally made it through the mountains were not guaranteed an easy new start. Waiting on the other side of the Rockies were the fearsome deserts of the Great Basin. Unlike the somewhat traversable prairies, this was true, parched, unforgiving wilderness. The intense heat and lack of shade made overland travel excruciating. Oxen, those loyal beasts of burden, dropped from heat stroke and dehydration as water sources grew fewer and farther between. With throats swollen and lips cracked, pioneers staggered onward in hopes of reaching a river or lake, only to find stagnant alkali waters that offered no relief. Haze from salt flats stung the eyes and obscured the path ahead. Swirling dust devils materialized from nowhere, pelting grit into every exposed crevice. In this unforgiving environment, even a small misfortune like a broken wagon wheel could spell doom if no help was near. Perhaps the ultimate cautionary tale of how brutal this landscape could be is the tragic fate of the Donner Party. In the spring of 1846, this group of 87 travelers set out from Illinois in a dozen overloaded wagons, dreaming of golden opportunity in California. An untested new route and a fateful series of delays sealed their doom. By the time the party reached the Great Salt Lake Desert in Utah, it was already August. The sun glared off blinding white salt pans as the emigrants inched along, scraping their livestock for any trace of food or moisture. It took them 6 grueling days to cross the 80-mile expanse, a hellish journey that left most of their oxen dead and wagons splintered. But the worst was yet to come. Arriving at the foot of the Sierra Nevada mountains, severely depleted and behind schedule in October, the exhausted party paused near the banks of Truckee Lake, not realizing they were about to face the cruelest winter in generations. An early blizzard lashed the mountains, sending many of the Donner wagons skidding off the icy precipices to smash on the rocks far below. Some survivors retreated to rough cabins near the lake, while others huddled in tents and hovels, all pinned down by 10-foot snowdrifts in the frigid shadows of the peaks. Hunting attempts proved futile, as the animals had all fled to lower elevations. Rations of jerky and hardtack quickly dwindled to nothing. In the final, harrowing months, the most unthinkable of survival tactics took hold as the starving wretches cannibalized the frozen dead to subsist a little longer. Heroic rescue parties from California eventually reached the ghost camps in February 1847, too late for many. Of the 81 original Donner Party members, only 45 staggered out alive. The rest lay forever entombed in the pitiless Sierra snows, a chilling reminder of nature's dominion over humankind's loftiest ambitions. Though their grisly tale is the stuff of macabre legend, the Donner Party's tragic end illustrates how perilous life in the untamed West could be for even the most capable and well-prepared. As daunting as overland passage was, establishing a new homestead in this savage landscape was equally fraught with challenges. Freshly arrived settlers were immediately confronted with the urgent need for shelter before exposure could claim them. With little timber to be found, most had to settle for carving primitive dugouts into the sides of hills or riverbanks. It was grim, dank, inglorious work, but these burrows at least afforded some protection from the relentless elements. But a roof overhead hardly guaranteed safety and comfort on the lawless frontier. Away from the stability of established towns and institutions, social order quickly frayed at the edges. In the absence of sheriffs and marshals to enforce laws, settlers were largely left to fend for themselves against the whims of unscrupulous men. Might made right in many a territory dispute, as the one quick with a gun or vicious in a brawl often got his way. Even the valiant souls who took up badges to defend order were not exempt from this constant peril. One such figure was stagecoach Mary Fields, a hard-nosed former slave who became the first African-American woman-star route mail carrier in the United States. Never one to back down from a fight, Fields once had her reputation tested by a hired gun while delivering mail in Montana. When the scoundrel made the mistake of trying to block her path, Fields calmly climbed down from her wagon, drew her revolver in one fluid motion, and shot the man square in the heart before he could even clear leather. In the split-second showdown, stagecoach Mary's lightning draw was all that stood between her and an early grave. A harsh reminder that on the lawless frontier, death was often just a heartbeat away. Such sudden, explosive violence was a constant threat in the rough-and-tumble Wild West. In the absence of established law enforcement, many disputes between feuding settlers, miners, or cattle barons were settled with hot lead and splattered blood. One of the most infamous examples was the Lincoln County War, a vicious conflict that engulfed the New Mexico Territory in the late 1870s. What began as a business rivalry between two mercantile stores in the boomtown of Lincoln quickly escalated into an all-out bloodbath. The entrenched establishment, represented by Irishman James Dolan and his partner John Riley, clashed with an upstart operation led by young Englishman John Tunstall and his attorney Alexander McSween. Both sides enlisted armed men to intimidate the other, transforming the dusty streets of Lincoln into a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark came on February 18th, 1878, when Tunstall was hunted down and murdered in cold blood by a posse loyal to Dolan and Riley. Tunstall's ranch hands, incensed by the cowardly ambush, formed their own vigilante group known as the Regulators to exact frontier justice. Among their numbers was none other than infamous outlaw Billy the Kid, who cut his teeth as a gunslinger during this bloody feud. Over the next 4 months, the Regulators clashed with Dolan's forces in a series of revenge killings, nighttime raids, and running gun battles through the wilderness. The violence reached a grim crescendo in the summer of 1878 with the Battle of Lincoln, a chaotic 5-day firefight that left the town bullet-riddled and smouldering. When the smoke finally cleared and the bodies were tallied, an astounding 22 men had been killed, including Alexander McSween, whose home was set ablaze with him inside. Billy the Kid narrowly escaped with his life by fleeing through a hail of gunfire, his legend firmly sealed in the annals of frontier history. The Lincoln County War remains a shocking example of how swiftly the absence of law and order could plunge a community into horrific bloodshed. But death in the Wild West didn't always come at the smoking end of a gun barrel. For the thousands of cowboys, miners, loggers, and railroad workers who ventured out to the lawless territories, simply making a living often meant putting their lives on the line every single day. With safety regulations virtually non-existent and medical care primitive at best, even honest work in the Old West was a dance with the reaper. Nat Love, born a slave in Tennessee in 1854, managed to survive the Civil War and make his way out to the wide open ranges of Kansas by the time he was 15 years old. An ace horseman with a tireless work ethic, Nat quickly landed a job as a ranch hand driving cattle along the infamous Chisholm Trail. It was perilous, back-breaking work. Weeks spent in the saddle, fighting off rustlers and braving stampedes, followed by raucous nights in the saloons and brothels of infamous cow towns like Abilene and Dodge City. For young Nat, who became known on the trail as Red River Dick, brushes with death were a daily occurrence. On one cattle drive, he narrowly avoided being trampled by 1,000 steers spooked by a thunderstorm. On another, he was bucked off a bronco during a rodeo, shattering his leg so badly the bone jutted through the skin. But perhaps his closest call came on a lonely stretch of road outside Deadwood, Dakota territory. Nat was minding the chuck wagon on a long drive when he was jumped by a band of 7 outlaws intent on rustling the herd. Outnumbered and outgunned, he still managed to fight off the thieves with his razor-sharp marksmanship, dropping 4 where they stood before the rest, turned tail, and ran. A few well-placed shots were all that stood between Nat and an unmarked grave on the prairie. Despite his grit and abilities, Nat Love was still a black man trying to make his way in a deeply prejudiced society. He faced constant racism, discrimination, and threats of violence both on the trail and in the rough settlements he passed through. But Nat never let himself become a victim. He fought back against all who challenged him and earned begrudging respect as one of the toughest cowboys to ever sit a saddle. Nat Love's harrowing exploits, chronicled in his memoir Life and Adventures of Nat Love, better known in the cattle country as Deadwood Dick, offer a glimpse into just how dangerous the daily realities of working in the Wild West could be. Even for a man of his talents and tenacity, staying alive often came down to luck, lightning reflexes, and sheer force of will. While cowboys like Nat Love faced death in the saddle, untold scores of miners met their fate deep beneath the earth in the mad scramble for precious metals. Tales of gold strikes in California, silver in Nevada, and all manner of riches waiting to be torn from the ground, lured droves of fortune seekers from every corner of the world to the rugged wilderness. Most of these would-be tycoons arrived with little more than a pickaxe, a tin pan, and a head full of dreams, only to find that the true gold in them hills was elusive misery and an early grave. With no safety regulations to speak of and greed as the driving imperative, mining camps became festering hives of danger, disease, and desperation. Whether placer mining in icy mountain streams or hard rock mining deep underground, these greenhorns quickly learned the true costs of their trade. Cave-ins, asphyxiation, mercury poisoning, and explosive accidents claimed thousands of lives. Toxic gases like radon and carbon monoxide lurked in the deep shafts and tunnels, suffocating those who ventured into their miasma. In the goldfields of California, hydraulic mining tore entire mountainsides to rubble, unleashing devastating floods and landslides. And for those who avoided a sudden death on the job, a slower demise often awaited in the form of silicosis, or miner's lung, a chronic and frequently fatal respiratory disease caused by inhaling silica dust churned up by dry drilling. An estimated 8,000 silver miners in the Comstock Lode died of silicosis between 1860 and 1900, hacking and wheezing through a living hell before finally succumbing. With thousands of single men crammed together in flimsy tent settlements and lawless boomtowns, violence and vice were never far from the miners' camps. Drunken brawls, fights over claims, and cold-blooded murders were disturbingly commonplace. Notorious badlands like Bodie, California, and Tombstone, Arizona, sprang up to feed the miners' thirsts for whiskey, women, and wanton destruction, leaving ghostly boneyards in their wake. Perhaps no one epitomized the brutal realities of the mining life more than Richard Watkins, a hard-luck prospector who barely survived the frenzy of the California gold rush. In 1849, Watkins set out from Illinois to seek his fortune along the American River near Sacramento. But after months of backbreaking labor in frigid streams, all he had to show for it was a persistent case of dysentery and a measly pouch of gold dust. With winter closing in and supplies running low, Watkins resigned himself to returning home empty-handed. But before he could leave the diggings, a group of claim jumpers ambushed him and left him for dead with a bullet in his gut. Through sheer grit, Watkins managed to claw his way out of the camp and drag himself to the nearest settlement, where a barber dug the slug out with a rusty razor. Against all odds, Richard Watkins survived his ordeal and eventually made his way back to Illinois, forever changed by the cruelty and brutality he witnessed in the goldfields. In a letter to his brother, he described the true costs of his ill-fated venture. "I have seen more suffering and hardships endured by the gold hunters than I ever dreamed of. Thousands have gone there and lost everything, money, property, and health, and many, very many, have lost their lives. The mines are a delusion and a snare. They are but a mighty cheat, and those who urge others to go are, in my opinion, no better than pickpockets." Watkins's bleak assessment was all too accurate for the scores of hapless souls who met their ends in the unforgiving mining camps of the Wild West. Whether crushed in a tunnel collapse, shot dead in a drunken dispute, or left choking on their own blood from a shattered lung, the promise of untold riches exacted a horrific toll in human lives. As deadly and soul-crushing as the mining camps could be, they were far from the only sites of danger and despair on the frontier. For the legions of impoverished dreamers who streamed into the West in search of opportunity, life was often a tenuous, hand-to-mouth existence, just one disaster away from ruin. With no social safety net to speak of, misfortune could strike suddenly and pitilessly, leaving its victims to fend for themselves or perish. Such was the fate of young Olive Oatman, whose family joined a wagon train bound for California in 1850 as part of the Brewsterite religious movement. Led by Prophet James Brewster, the group believed they were being divinely guided to establish a socialistic utopia near. Here's a continuation of the script. Native American tribes had already developed sophisticated cultures and ways of life that were deeply interwoven with the land. But as waves of American settlers poured westward, the delicate balance was destroyed. Miners, ranchers, and homesteaders invaded sacred spaces and hunting grounds that had sustained tribes for generations. The newcomers' insatiable hunger for land and resources, stoked by the doctrine of manifest destiny, made conflict inevitable. Treaties were signed and broken, as tribes were coerced into relinquishing huge swathes of ancestral territory. When some chose to resist, the US government responded with overwhelming military force. Once proud tribes found themselves attacked on all fronts. Beyond the direct casualties of warfare, entire communities were decimated by starvation and European diseases like smallpox. With their traditional ways of life disrupted, many became dependent on government provisions that arrived sporadically, if at all. It was a tragic era of broken promises, displacement, and cultural destruction. The sad fate of the Utes and their visionary leader Black Hawk exemplifies the injustices endured by so many native peoples. By the mid-1800s, the Utes had lost most of their lands in Utah and Colorado to white settlement. Desperate and facing starvation, Black Hawk led a courageous resistance in 1865, conducting raids to reclaim their homeland and food supplies. But the Utes were outnumbered and outgunned. After being pursued over hundreds of miles, Black Hawk surrendered in 1872 to save his people from a massacre. In exchange for their compliance, the Utes were promised land and provisions. But in reality, they were forced onto desolate reservations and left with meager rations. Black Hawk himself died just 2 years later at age 35, his health broken by grief, hunger, and despair. But his legacy lived on as a symbol of Native American resistance in the face of overwhelming odds. While he didn't live to see it, the courage and sacrifice of leaders like Black Hawk would slowly turn the tide of public opinion, leading to more humane policies, if not true justice. As the frontier pressed onward, settlers would discover that the West's stunning beauty concealed many grave dangers. The very landscape itself could be a deadly adversary. In an era before satellites and reliable weather forecasting, pioneers were at the mercy of Mother Nature's tempestuous moods. A calm, clear day could swiftly devolve into a raging blizzard, blinding sandstorm, or horizon-spanning wildfire. Such sudden onslaughts could wipe out entire homesteads and villages with little warning. Even when the skies were tranquil, the land teemed with other perils. Grizzly bears and mountain lions stalked the backcountry, seeing the settlers' livestock as easy prey. Venomous rattlesnakes coiled unseen in the brush, delivering potentially lethal bites. And any body of standing water could conceal clouds of disease-spreading mosquitoes. Then there were the swarms of pests that could strip a farm bare overnight. Locusts were the most dreaded of these insectoid invaders. Darkening the skies like ominous storm clouds, massive locusts' swarms wrought devastation across the West in the late 1800s. In some regions, their voracious appetites obliterated entire crop harvests. Families who had toiled for months would watch helplessly as their wheat, corn, and vegetables vanished, leaving behind denuded stalks and financial ruin. The scope of the damage was a major factor in the economic crash known as the Panic of 1893. Occasionally, the forces of nature and human desperation collided to produce true wildcards, figures who straddled the line between hero and outlaw. El Fego Baca's story is a prime example of how survival in the lawless West often came down to guts, guns, and more than a little luck. Born in 1865 in Socorro, New Mexico, Baca was a living embodiment of the untamed frontier. Over his storied life, he would serve as a sheriff, lawyer, bounty hunter, and even actor in silent films. But his most legendary feat was a seemingly impossible standoff against 80 hired guns in the town of Frisco. The trouble began in 1884, when the 19-year-old Baca arrested a cowboy for shooting recklessly in the streets. Enraged, the cowboys' friends soon surrounded the tiny jacal where Baka had holed up with his prisoner. A furious gunfight erupted, with the posse firing over 4,000 rounds into the flimsy mud walls. Miraculously, Baka escaped unscathed after 36 hours pinned down, having killed 4 of his attackers. The building was later found to be riddled with over 400 bullet holes. Baka's astonishing display of poise under fire earned him the nickname the Mexican Deadeye and cemented his status as a folk hero. But such tales of miraculous survival were the exception in the Old West, not the rule. For every El Fuego Baka who managed to beat the odds, countless others perished lonely, unsung deaths. Whether they fell to bullets, blizzards, disease, or deprivation, one truth remained constant. Life on the frontier was precarious and often pitifully short. In an era without social safety nets, one piece of misfortune could set off a domino effect of ruin. A breadwinner felled by sickness, an injury, or an outlaw's bullet could condemn an entire family to starvation and homelessness. Orphaned children like Olive Oatman found themselves cast into nightmarish ordeals of survival. Born in Illinois in 1837, Olive was just 14 when her family joined a wagon train heading for California. But on the banks of the Gila River in present-day Arizona, the expedition was attacked by a group of Native Americans, likely from the Yavapai tribe. Olive's parents and 4 of her siblings were killed in the raid. Along with her 7-year-old sister, Mary Ann, Olive was abducted and enslaved by the tribe. For a year, the sisters endured abuse and grueling manual labor. Then they were traded to the Mojave people, who tattooed the girls' chins and arms in keeping with tribal custom. While the Mojave treated the Oatman girls more gently, tragedy struck again in 1855, when both Mary Ann and Olive fell ill, likely from malnutrition. Mary Ann did not survive. Finally, after 5 years of captivity, Olive was ransomed by the US government and released at Fort Yuma. Olive's return to white society was bittersweet. Curious throngs flocked to see the girl with the blue tattoo, making her an object of fascination and revulsion. Expected to play the role of the civilized Indian captive, Olive struggled to process her trauma while supporting herself through public appearances. The Oatman family's heart-rending saga epitomized the merciless calculus of the American West. One never knew when a twist of fate might shatter families and leave survivors scarred for life. For those seeking to put down roots and build new communities, it was a sobering reality indeed. Against this backdrop of hardship and happenstance, the success of any frontier settlement took on an almost miraculous sheen. It is a testament to the indomitable spirit of those pioneers that they managed to scratch out an existence at all, let alone build the foundations of mighty states. But as the West became more populous and interconnected, the anarchic conditions of the early frontier began to evolve. Stagecoach lines, railroads, and telegraph wires slowly knit the isolated outposts into a more cohesive whole. With improved communication and transportation came more centralized governance and law enforcement. Gradually, the Wild West of popular imagination started to be tamed. Whereas vigilante justice and bloody feuds had once been the norm, now there were more lawmen, courts, and consequences for those who crossed the line. But this transition was far from smooth or bloodless. In the 1870s, New Mexico's Lincoln County became a microcosm of this uneasy balance between old ways and new. Here, the long-simmering conflict between rival cattle barons erupted into all-out warfare, with hired guns battling in the streets and innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. The Lincoln County War had its roots in the age-old story of money, power, and control of the land. On one side was the entrenched house, a conglomerate of businessmen and ranchers who had long dominated the region. On the other were upstart ranchers and merchants chafing against the house's monopoly. Tensions reached a boiling point with the murder of rancher John Tunstall, an Englishman who had become a leader of the anti-house faction. Tunstall's death ignited a tinderbox of grievances, as his ranch hands and supporters sought revenge against the house-affiliated sheriff and his men. Over the next 5 months, Lincoln County descended into a maelstrom of ambushes, gunfights, and lynchings. The combat ebbed and flowed as the US Army was called in to quell the violence, only to withdraw and watch it reignite. In the end, dozens had died, and the county lay in shambles. Though the House faction emerged victorious, the Lincoln County War laid bare the limits of frontier justice. It was a stark reminder that in the absence of strong institutions, power begat violence, and violence begat chaos. For the West to truly thrive, the rule of law would need to supplant the rule of the gun. As the 19th century wound to a close, such hard-won lessons slowly began to take root. Though range wars and shootouts still erupted, they became more the exception than the everyday reality. Frontier communities that had once been rough-and-tumble outposts started to resemble proper towns. But even as the West matured, the scars of its brutal beginnings lingered just beneath the surface. In the haunted eyes of orphans like Olive Oatman, in the bullet-riddled ghost towns, in the mournful stillness of the reservations, one could still feel the weight of all that had been lost and all that had been endured. The paradox of the American West is that its soaring triumphs were inextricably interwoven with its deepest tragedies. The same land that had broken so many had also forged a culture of resilience, a stubborn refusal to submit to adversity. It was an ethos born of necessity, in a place where each sunrise had been a small victory. So as we look back on this pivotal chapter of history, it is worth reflecting on both the light and the darkness. To remember the courage, ingenuity, and grit of those pioneers, while also reckoning with the suffering and injustice inflicted in the name of progress. Only in balancing the two can we truly understand the forces that shaped the American character. In the end, perhaps the real legacy of the Wild West is the hard knowledge that life is fragile, that civilization is precarious, and that nothing can be taken for granted. It is a wisdom earned through bitter trial, paid for in blood and tears. And it is a wisdom we would do well to carry with us, even in gentler, more forgiving times. For the Western frontier may have vanished into memory, but its lessons endure, etched into the very bedrock of our nation. In each generation's struggle to build a better world, we see echoes of those long-ago dreamers who first dared to imagine a life among the tumbleweeds and buttes. Theirs was a vision of freedom, of self-determination, of limitless horizons. It was a vision that proved as treacherous as it was beautiful, as deadly as it was alluring. And yet, in the face of all that the West could throw at them, they persevered, they adapted, they found a way. So let us honor their sacrifices by striving to uphold the ideals they reached for, even as we learn from their mistakes. Let us remember that though the frontier may be gone, the spirit that tamed it lives on, in the restless urge to explore, to invent, to create a future as wide and bright as the western sky. And when we feel the pull of that distant horizon, let us pause to salute the memory of those who rode that way first. The brave, the foolish, the dreamers and drifters who etched their stories into the vast canvas of the American West. They may be gone, but they are not forgotten. And as long as their tales are told, they never truly die. So rest easy, weary time traveler, and let your thoughts wander back to a wilder, more untamed era. To a time when the world was young and the West was wide, and each new day dawned like a promise, waiting to be fulfilled. And may you find, in the fading echoes of hoofbeats and gunshots, a reminder of all that we once were, and all that we might yet become. As we've seen, life in the Wild West was a far cry from the romanticized tales of noble cowboys and charming outlaws. The daily reality for most settlers was a harsh, unforgiving existence fraught with constant dangers and hardships. One of the most formidable obstacles pioneers faced was the rugged, inhospitable landscape itself. Vast stretches of scorching desert, treacherous mountain passes, and sun-baked plains stretched endlessly to the horizon. Towering redwoods and impassable canyons stood as silent sentinels, indifferent to the fates of those who dared to enter their domain. Water was often scarce and precious, with settlers clustering near the few reliable rivers and streams that crisscrossed the region. Flash floods could sweep away a homestead in seconds, while brutal blizzards buried the frontier in an icy shroud for months on end. The very earth seemed fickle and capricious, reluctant to yield its bounty without a bitter fight. Eking out a living required backbreaking toil from sunup to sundown, with families struggling to raise crops and livestock in an environment that often seemed hostile to all life. Perhaps no story captures the horrors of taming the western wilderness quite like the gruesome tale of the ill-fated Donner Party. In the spring of 1846, a group of some 87 settlers departed Illinois, dreaming of greener pastures in the lush valleys of California. Little did they know that their arduous 2,500-mile journey would soon devolve into a desperate fight for survival. Beset by delays and fateful decisions, the party found themselves stranded high in the icy peaks of the Sierra Nevada mountains as winter closed in. Pummeled by relentless blizzards and drifting snow, the settlers huddled in crude cabins and tattered tents, slowly starving as their meager food stores dwindled. Some tried to press on, only to succumb to the numbing cold and disappear forever into the howling snowstorms. Others perished from disease and infections that ravaged their weakened bodies. And as the cruel winter dragged on, the unimaginable occurred. The desperate survivors resorted to cannibalism, feeding on the flesh of their fallen comrades to stave off the gnawing ache of hunger. When relief parties finally reached the Donner Camp in February of 1847, only 48 emaciated survivors remained, many of them shattered in mind and body. The macabre details of their ordeal quickly scandalized the nation, serving as a grim reminder of the merciless brutality of the untamed West. But even for those lucky settlers who didn't meet such a grisly fate, daily life on the frontier was still fraught with myriad dangers and challenges. Beyond the unforgiving elements, they also had to contend with the utter lack of law and order in the fledgling Western territories. In the early days of westward expansion, the frontier remained a largely ungoverned wilderness. Proper lawmen and judicial systems were slow to be established, leaving settlers with little recourse or protection. Vigilante justice often reigned supreme, with wronged parties taking matters into their own hands to settle scores and disputes. Without the firm hand of the law to keep the peace, the Wild West soon earned its reputation as a haven for outlaws, bandits, and ruthless opportunists. Drawn by the promise of gold, land, and the chance to start anew, all manner of unsavory characters flocked to the untamed frontier, preying on those weaker or less wily than themselves. Highway robbers lay in wait along lonely stretches of trail, relieving unwary travelers of their valuables at gunpoint. Smooth-talking swindlers worked the saloons and gambling halls, cheating greenhorns out of their hard-earned cash with rigged games and empty promises. And corrupt officials used their power to line their own pockets, selling out the public trust to the highest bidder. In the face of such blatant injustice, some brave souls took it upon themselves to stand up for what was right, no matter the risk. One such figure was Mary Fields, better known by her nickname Stagecoach Mary. Born a slave in Tennessee in 1832, Fields eventually made her way out west after the Civil War, settling in the wilds of Montana. There, she found work as a mail carrier, earning a reputation as one of the toughest and most reliable riders in the territory. Fields was a force to be reckoned with, standing over 6 feet tall and packing a pair of six-shooters and a biting wit. She never backed down from a fight and was known for her unflinching courage in the face of danger. Legend has it that one fateful day, a hired gun came to town looking to settle an old score with stagecoach Mary. The brash young outlaw called her out into the street for a shootout at high noon, expecting an easy victory over a lowly black woman. But he gravely underestimated his opponent's mettle. As a curious crowd gathered to watch the impending duel, Mary strode out to face her challenger, steely-eyed and unafraid. The two stared each other down for a long moment, hands hovering over their holstered pistols. Then, in a flash, Mary drew her sidearm and squeezed off a shot, striking the cocky gunslinger square between the eyes before he could even clear his holster. As the lifeless body crumpled to the ground, Mary calmly holstered her weapon and went about her business. Just another day on the job for the indomitable stagecoach Mary. But such moments of rough justice were small comforts in a land where the spectre of death constantly stalked the innocent and guilty alike. In the lawless frontier towns that sprung up practically overnight, the threat of violence hung heavy in the air, as pervasive as the swirling trail dust. Feuds, duels, and drunken brawls were an almost daily occurrence, with tempers running hot as the blistering sun overhead. Men defended their honor and property with fists, blades, and bullets, scratching out a hard-scrabble existence in a world with little room for mercy or second chances. In an era when might made right, having a quick draw and a steely nerve was often the only thing standing between a man and a bloody end in some nameless gulch. This brutal culture of violence reached a fever pitch during the infamous Lincoln County War, a bloody conflict that engulfed the New Mexico territory in the late 1870s. What began as a bitter rivalry between two powerful mercantile houses soon exploded into an all-out battle for control of the region's lucrative cattle trade. On one side stood the entrenched House of Murphy Dolan, which had long held a monopoly on the local beef market through a combination of shrewd business deals and outright intimidation. On the other was a group of upstart cattle ranchers and merchants, led by a wealthy Englishman named John Tunstall, who sought to break the house's iron grip on the industry. As tensions mounted, both sides began recruiting their own private armies of gunslingers and hard cases to protect their interests. Among Tunstall's hires was a young sharpshooting ranch hand named Henry McCarty, better known to history as Billy the Kid. The simmering conflict finally boiled over in February of 1878, when Tunstall was gunned down by a posse of Murphy Dolan men, including corrupt Lincoln County Sheriff William Brady. Tunstall's death ignited a firestorm of retaliatory violence as the Kid and his fellow regulators launched a bloody campaign of vengeance against the house and its allies. Over the next several months, the two warring factions clashed in a series of vicious firefights and ambushes, leaving dozens dead and the county in a state of virtual anarchy. The Kid himself cut a swath through the territory, earning a reputation as one of the deadliest guns in the West. In the end, it would take the intervention of President Rutherford B. Hayes and the US Army to finally quell the violence and restore some semblance of order to Lincoln County. But by then, the damage had been done, and the region would bear the scars of the brutal conflict for generations to come. The Lincoln County War stood as a stark embodiment of the often savage realities of frontier justice, where the rule of law was all too often replaced by the rule of the gun. It was a grim reminder that beneath the veneer of progress and civilization, the Wild West remained a largely untamed and unforgiving land. The threat of sudden violence was a constant spectre that loomed over daily life, as ubiquitous as the very dirt beneath the settlers' feet. Even the most mundane of activities could erupt into a deadly confrontation at the slightest provocation or perceived slight. Saloons and gambling halls, in particular, were notorious hotbeds of drunken mayhem, where hard men with short fuses and easy triggers congregated to drink away their sorrows and stake their fortunes on the turn of a card or roll of the dice. In these rowdy establishments, the heady mix of whiskey, testosterone, and hair trigger tempers proved a volatile brew, with disputes over cheating, unpaid debts, or wounded pride often erupting into all-out brawls. Chairs were smashed, bottles broken over heads, and bullets flew with reckless abandon as men fought tooth and nail to assert their dominance over each other. More than a few hapless souls met their untimely ends in such squalid surroundings, bleeding out on the sawdust floor of some dingy barroom with a bullet in their gut or a knife in their back. It was a harsh and unforgiving world where life was often nasty, brutish, and short. But even for those who managed to avoid a violent end, the grinding hardship and backbreaking labour of frontier life took an equally heavy toll. In an era before modern conveniences and labour protections, settlers had to contend with working conditions that were often as gruelling as they were dangerous. From sun up to sundown, men and women alike toiled at a variety of arduous and unforgiving tasks, all while contending with the ever-present threat of injury or death. In the mines that dotted the western landscape, workers spent long hours swinging pickaxes and pushing ore carts in claustrophobic, dimly lit tunnels, breathing in the choking dust of pulverized rock with every labored breath. Cave-ins, explosions, and toxic gases claimed countless lives, while the lucky ones often emerged with their bodies broken and their lungs permanently scarred from a lifetime of hard labor. The distant thunder of collapsing shafts and the mournful wail of newly made widows became a grim soundtrack to daily life in the mining camps. On the sprawling cattle ranches that fueled the booming beef industry, cowhands faced their own set of challenges and dangers. Long days in the saddle beneath the scorching sun, driving ornery herds across miles of parched and unforgiving terrain. The constant threat of stampedes, rustlers, and hostile natives, not to mention the ever-present danger of being thrown from a bucking bronco or gored by an ornery longhorn bull. It was a hard and thankless job, one that left many a cowpoke battered, broken, and spat out by the unforgiving frontier. For the brave souls who answered the call of the railroad, building the iron highways that would finally tame the wild and connect the coasts, the work was no less brutal. Laboring from dawn to dusk, crews laid mile after mile of heavy track across sun-baked plains and through twisting mountain passes, driving spikes and hauling timber with nothing but raw muscle and sheer grit. The work was backbreaking, the living conditions squalid, and the dangers ever-present. Boiler explosions, crushing injuries from wayward ballast or malfunctioning equipment, and even attacks by hostile tribes who saw the railroad as a threat to their way of life. Many a labourer met a grisly end beneath the relentless wheels of progress, their sacrifice paving the way for a new era of transportation and commerce. But perhaps no job in the Old West was quite as dangerous or grueling as that of the lumberjack, the hardened men who felled the mighty redwoods and pines that would build a nation. Armed with little more than axes, crosscut saws, and raw determination, these rough-hewn loggers ventured deep into the virgin forests of the frontier, braving towering giants that could crush a man like a bug if he misstepped. Injuries were a fact of daily life, from severed limbs to catastrophic blunt trauma from falling timber. And even for those who escaped the physical toll of the job, the isolation and harsh living conditions took a heavy mental and emotional toll. Many a lumberjack turned to the bottle to escape the grinding loneliness and despair, drowning their sorrows in cheap whiskey and bawdy camp songs. Through it all, these hard-scrabble settlers and labourers struggled to eke out a living and build a better life for themselves and their families. But for many, the promise of the frontier proved little more than a cruel mirage, a shimmering dream that dissolved into the harsh light of reality. life on the frontier was an often Hobbesian existence, a daily struggle marked by grinding poverty and economic hardship. For all but a lucky few, the fabled riches of the West remained tantalizingly out of reach, a mocking reminder of the gulf between the myth and the reality. Many settlers arrived with little more than the clothes on their backs and a few meager possessions, dreaming of staking their claim and building a better life in the untamed wilderness. But the unforgiving landscape and harsh realities of frontier living quickly took their toll, leaving many struggling just to survive from one day to the next. Crop failures and droughts could wipe out a season's worth of back-breaking labor in the blink of an eye, leaving families destitute and starving. Plagues of locusts descended on fields like biblical curses, stripping the land bare and reducing once thriving homesteads to desolate ruins. In the face of such relentless hardship, many settlers found themselves at the mercy of wealthy cattle barons and railroad tycoons, who exploited their desperation and vulnerability for their own gain. These powerful men wielded outsized influence in the loosely governed territories, using their wealth and connections to bend the law to their will and crush any who dared to stand against them. For the poor and disenfranchised, there was little recourse or refuge in the dog-eat-dog world of the Wild West. With no social safety net to catch them when they fell, many were left to fend for themselves, living hand-to-mouth and praying for a break that all too often never came. The story of Olive Oatman stands as a poignant and heartbreaking example of the cruel twists of fate that could befall even the most innocent on the unforgiving frontier. Born to a family of Illinois farmers in 1837, Olive was just 14 years old when her parents decided to join a wagon train bound for California, dreaming of a better life in the golden land of opportunity. But disaster struck just a few months into their journey when the family was attacked by a group of hostile Yavapai warriors in what is now Arizona. Olive's parents and 4 of her siblings were brutally murdered in front of her eyes, their bodies left to rot under the merciless desert sun. Olive and her 7-year-old sister Mary Ann were taken captive by the raiders, who brought them back to their village as slaves. For the next year, the girls endured unspeakable hardships and abuse at the hands of their captors, forced to perform back-breaking labor and scavenge for scraps of food just to survive. As if their ordeal wasn't horrific enough, a severe drought struck the region, plunging the tribe into famine and desperation. Unable to feed their captives any longer, the Yavapai sold the sisters to a neighboring band of Mojave Indians. Yet another wrenching upheaval in the girls' already shattered lives. Olive would spend the next 4 years living among the Mojave, gradually assimilating into their culture and even receiving the distinctive blue chin tattoos that marked her as a member of the tribe. But tragedy struck once again when a second drought ravaged the land, claiming Mary Ann's life and leaving Olive utterly bereft and alone. In 1856, a chance encounter with a group of American soldiers finally led to Olive's rescue and return to white society. But the scars of her ordeal ran deep, both physically and emotionally. Orphaned, traumatized, and bearing the indelible marks of her captivity on her face, Olive struggled to readjust to life in a world that now felt as alien and hostile as the one she had left behind. Olive Oatman's heart-wrenching tale is a powerful reminder of the brutal realities of life on the frontier, where even the most innocent could fall victim to the cruel vagaries of fate. It underscores the incredible resilience and fortitude of those who endured such unimaginable hardships, only to be forever haunted by the scars they bore, both seen and unseen. In a harsh and unforgiving world, where even baseline survival was a daily struggle, the spectre of disease and death constantly stalked the men, women, and children of the Wild West. In an age before modern medicine, even minor injuries and illnesses could quickly spiral into life-threatening crises, with little recourse or relief available to the afflicted. Diseases like smallpox, cholera, dysentery, and tuberculosis ran rampant through frontier communities, decimating entire families and leaving behind a grim tableau of suffering and loss. Cramped and unsanitary living conditions, coupled with poor nutrition and limited access to clean water, created the perfect breeding ground for these microscs. Olive Oatman's life took a tragic turn when she was just 14 years old. In 1851, Olive was traveling west with her Mormon family from Illinois to California when their wagon was attacked by a group of Native Americans, likely from the Yavapai tribe, in what is now Arizona. Olive witnessed the brutal massacre of her parents and 4 of her siblings. Only she and her 7-year-old sister Mary Ann survived, taken captive by the raiders. The girls lived with the Yavapai for about a year, forced to forage for food, gather firewood, and endure harsh conditions. They were beaten if they did not work hard enough. Olive later described the trauma of this time, saying, "We were captives and must submit to our fate or die." In 1852, the Yavapai traded the sisters to the Mojave people. This was actually a stroke of luck. The Mojave treated the girls more gently and adopted them into the tribe. A Mojave family took the sisters in, caring for them and treating them as their own. They were given new names. Olive became Och and Mary Ann Topeka. The Mojave chief Espanola and his wife Espanio became like second parents to the girls. During her time with the Mojave, Olive received the distinctive blue tattoo on her chin that marked her as a member of the tribe. The tattoo was a series of vertical blue lines from her lower lip to below her chin. Olive lived with the Mojave for 4 years, until a devastating smallpox outbreak and drought led to food scarcity. Tragically, Mary Ann did not survive this period, succumbing to starvation in 1855. In 1856, Olive's ordeal finally ended when rumors of a white girl living with the Mojave reached the authorities at Fort Yuma in California. After some negotiations, the Mojave agreed to release 16-year-old Olive to the fort in exchange for blankets and horses. Olive was soon reunited with her brother Lorenzo, who had survived the attack 5 years earlier and had never stopped searching for his sisters. Returning to white society brought new challenges for Olive. Although she became a celebrity and even collaborated on a best-selling book about her experiences called Life Among the Indians, she struggled to adapt. Her Mojave chin tattoo marked her as different, and she faced harsh judgment and rumors. Through it all, Olive never spoke negatively of her time with the tribes, instead promoting understanding between the two cultures. In a sad postscript to Olive's tale, the year after her release, the Mojave tribe suffered a brutal attack from the US Army, despite their peaceful relations. Crops and food stores were destroyed, leaving the tribe facing starvation. Olive actually took up a collection to try to provide some relief to her former adopted family. Olive Oatman's story reflects the brutal realities and cultural conflicts of the frontier West. Orphaned, kidnapped, traded between tribes, and forced to struggle for mere survival, her early life was marked by tragedy and hardship. And even after her release, the judgment and lack of understanding she faced shows how social divisions ran deep. Yet Olive's endurance through harrowing circumstances and her ability to find some solace and kinship even among her captors also reflects the strength and adaptability it took to survive in this unforgiving time and place. The precarious existence of frontier life hung in the balance not just due to human conflicts and scarcities, but also because of the whims of Mother Nature herself. The American West was a land of climatic extremes and natural dangers that could strike at any moment. Severe weather events, from lethal blizzards to crop-withering droughts, were a fact of life for settlers. And the untamed landscape concealed threats from fearsome creatures and fast-spreading wildfires. Few natural disasters so thoroughly devastated the economy of the frontier West as the locust swarms of the early 1870s. Massive dark clouds of the swarming insects, so thick they blotted out the sun, descended on farms and fields across the Great Plains, devouring everything in their path. When the swarms finally dissipated, a region once ripe with crops had been stripped bare. The locusts struck at a time when the frontier economy was already struggling under the weight of a financial panic and recession. Banks and businesses were failing, unemployment was rising, and drought had already made the harvest meager. When the locusts wiped out what little crops had survived, it was a brutal blow. Suddenly food was scarce, and any hope for a profitable harvest to pay off debts and see families through the winter was gone. Many simply went hungry. Malnutrition and starvation became real threats as the winter of 1873 approached, with barren fields and empty pantries. Those with the means to do so packed up and abandoned their land, relinquishing their homestead claims and heading back east. It's estimated that the population of Kansas dropped by nearly 30% during the grasshopper plague. Dreams of a new life in the West had been dashed by a ravenous insect smaller than a paperclip. The economic fallout radiated from the agricultural sector to the fledgling towns and cities that relied on a thriving farming community to stay afloat. As incomes evaporated and farmers fled, main streets shuttered and city populations shrank. Railroads and industries that served the region also struggled as their customer base disappeared nearly overnight. For a time, it seemed the hungry locusts might devour the very future of the American frontier. Of course, the settlers were not the only ones impacted. The locust swarms were a disaster for the Native American tribes of the Great Plains too. The insects made no distinctions between crops sown by homesteaders and the prairie grasses and wild vegetation that tribes like the Sioux depended on to feed their horses. With their primary mode of transportation and basis of wealth threatened, the societal strains and scarcities of the Panic of 1873 touched native communities as well. Many were forced into greater dependence on government-supplied rations, undermining their autonomy. It took years for the frontier states to recover from the economic and societal shock of the locust swarms. Some areas never fully bounced back, with the combined blows of drought, recession, and insect infestation forever stunting their growth. The grasshopper plague served as a stark reminder of how precarious life in the West really was. A sunny, thriving homestead could, in a matter of hours, be reduced to a barren wasteland by a force of nature beyond anyone's control. It was a hard lesson learned for the settlers, one that shook the confidence of even the hardiest pioneers and shattered the myth of the inexhaustibly abundant frontier. But even more fearsome than any swarm of insects was the prospect of facing down a furious grizzly bear. In the 1880s New Mexico, a bold young frontierswoman named Susan McSween would find herself in just such a terrifying scenario while out riding with a friend in the foothills of the Sacramento Mountains. At just 20 years old, the recently widowed Susan had already lived through her share of Western violence, having lost her husband to a shootout during the Lincoln County War. But nothing could have prepared her for this encounter with one of the frontier's apex predators. As Susan and her friend picked their way through a narrow ravine, their horses suddenly grew agitated, tossing their heads and dancing nervously. Moments later, the women spotted the cause of their distress: a massive grizzly bear rearing up on its hind legs on a rocky ledge above them. The creature let out a bone-chilling roar before dropping to all fours and beginning to lumber down the slope, making a beeline for the terrified riders. There was no time to flee. The tight walls of the ravine, the panicking horses, and the quickly advancing bear made escape impossible. Susan's friend began to scream, while Susan frantically grabbed for the rifle in her saddle scabbard. She had never been a particularly skilled shot, and her husband had handled most of the hunting, but she was the only thing standing between them and a mauling. Trying to steady her trembling hands, Susan raised the rifle and took aim at the charging grizzly. At this range, it was an easy shot, but a minor wound would only enrage the animal further. She had to make it count. As the bear closed the distance with terrifying speed, Susan squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing off the narrow canyon walls. At first, it seemed to have no effect, as the bear continued its furious charge. Susan fumbled to reload, fearing the worst. But then, just a few yards from the horses, the great bear stumbled. The wind left its lungs in a heaving sigh, and its legs crumpled beneath it as it crashed to the ground, felled by Susan's shot. The bullet had found its mark, piercing the bear's heart and lungs. The incredible luck of this shot, with an early model rifle under terrifying circumstances, was not lost on Susan. She would later marvel that, "I have never been able to tell how I chanced to hit the bear at all." Susan's close call with the Sacramento mountain grizzly bear quickly took on larger-than-life status in the tales told around the frontier. In retellings, the bear grew to impossible sizes. The stakes rose to even more harrowing heights. It's a reminder of how a single dramatic moment could be woven into Western lore, the facts massaged to create a mythic story of frontier survival against towering odds. But for the very real people who lived through these heart-pounding encounters, the fear and adrenaline were far from the stuff of exciting stories. Close calls with nature's fury were a stark reminder of how quickly death could strike on the frontier, whether by fang, claw, bullet, or act of God. Surviving to see another day in the face of such threats was a feat worthy of acclaim, but also a somber warning to never let one's guard down in a land so full of danger. Despite her brush with death in the mountains, Susan McSween would go on to live a long and extraordinary life. A savvy businesswoman and renowned frontier beauty, she played a key role in developing the ranching and mining economy of New Mexico, amassing a small fortune along the way. She would eventually marry again, becoming Susan McSween Barber, though she was forever immortalized as the cattle queen of New Mexico. Yet even such a formidable frontierswoman, who stared down range wars and charging grizzlies, was not immune to the ever-present spectre of death in the West. Perhaps nothing speaks more poignantly to the brutality and precariousness of frontier living than the tragic mortality rates of the time, especially among young children. Accidents, disease, malnutrition, and lack of medical care meant that reaching adulthood was an achievement in itself. It's estimated that in the 1800s frontier towns, a staggering 30 to 50% of children did not live to see their 5th birthday. Many families lost multiple children to premature deaths, leaving behind a void that could never be filled. For women on the frontier, the dangers of childbirth were especially acute. Without access to trained doctors or sterile medical facilities, giving birth was a potentially deadly ordeal. If the blood loss, pain, or infection didn't claim the mother's life, it was still all too common for newborns to be lost to complications during delivery. The anguish and sorrow of holding a stillborn infant, or burying a child whose life had barely begun, was a tragedy that bonded many frontier women in unspoken grief. Even for children who survived infancy, the hardscrabble conditions of homesteading and lack of modern medicine meant that frontier living was full of potentially deadly hazards. Contaminated drinking water could cause life-threatening dysentery and cholera. Malnutrition left children weak and vulnerable to a host of diseases. And the countless daily chores of frontier life, from tending animals to cooking over open flames, could lead to tragic accidents in an instant. This near-constant spectre of child mortality left profound psychic scars on frontier families and communities. The grief of losing a child was compounded by the guilt and helplessness many parents felt at being unable to save them despite their desperate efforts. Some became hardened to loss as an unavoidable fact of life, armoring their hearts against the pain. Others poured their anguish into ensuring the survival of their remaining children at all costs. It's difficult to imagine the emotional toll this took on even the most resilient of settlers. To pour so much hope, love, and backbreaking effort into building a life for one's children, only to watch them suffer and succumb to fates beyond one's control. It's a heartache that defies articulation. The family plots of frontier cemeteries, with their many tiny graves, stand as somber reminders of just how tenuous and tragic life in the American West could be. In conclusion, while popular culture tends to mythologize and romanticize the Wild West, the realities for those who actually lived on the frontier were often harsh, unforgiving, and downright brutal. From the dangers of the untamed landscape itself, to the lawlessness and violence of frontier society, to the ever-present threats of disease, starvation, and yes, even the ravages of nature in the form of charging grizzly bears and crop-destroying locust swarms, survival was a daily struggle. Perhaps most heart-wrenching of all were the unimaginable emotional and psychological traumas endured by those who lost loved ones, especially children, to the myriad dangers of frontier life. The grief and anguish borne by settlers who watched helplessly as disease, accidents, and the hazards of childbirth claimed the lives of their sons and daughters, left scars that could never fully heal. Just as surely as Olive Oatman's Mojave chin tattoos marked her forever as a survivor of unfathomable hardship. Yet it's equally true that this stark, brutal reality also bred a certain toughness, resilience, and self-reliance in those who endured it. Pioneers like Susan McSween and Olive Oatman summoned incredible wells of strength and fortitude in the face of tragedies and dangers that would break many a spirit. The hard lessons learned through constant brushes with death and loss taught frontier denizens to be resourceful, tenacious, and to cherish and fight for those they held dear, knowing that it could all be ripped away in an instant. So while the romantic mythology of the Wild West makes for thrilling stories and rollicking ballads, the truth behind that mythology is in many ways even more compelling and awe-inspiring. The fact that the men, women, and children who ventured out to build lives on the American frontier managed to survive and even thrive in the face of such brutal adversity is a testament to the indomitable nature of the human spirit. Though we may not face the same hardships they did, perhaps we can all learn something from the grit, adaptability, and resilience of these frontier forebears. In a world that can still feel harsh and unforgiving at times, their stories stand as reminders that even the darkest and most brutal of circumstances can be weathered and overcome with courage, tenacity, and the support of a community that bands together in times of struggle. The Wild West may have been a brutal place, but it forged a breed of survivors whose strength and spirit echo through the generations and continue to shape the character of the American West to this day. The dusty streets of Tombstone, Arizona Territory were no place for the faint of heart in the early 1880s. Gun duels, stagecoach robberies, and barroom brawls were part of the fabric of daily life in this infamous boomtown. But amidst all the chaos and violence, one larger-than-life figure stood out, the legendary gunfighter and gambler known as Doc Holliday. John Henry "Doc" Holliday was born into a well-to-do Georgia family in 1851. His mother died of tuberculosis when he was just 15, a tragedy that would foreshadow his own lifelong battle with the disease. Young John showed great intelligence and aptitude, earning his Doctor of Dental Surgery degree at the tender age of 20. But shortly after starting his dental practice, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis himself. Doctors gave him just a few months to live. Facing his own mortality, Holliday headed west in 1873, hoping the drier climate might ease his symptoms and prolong his life. He set up dental practices in Dallas and Denver, but his coughing fits and the constant pain made dentistry difficult. To make ends meet, he increasingly turned to gambling, a pursuit at which he excelled thanks to his sharp mind and cool demeanor. Gambling halls in the Old West could be very dangerous places. Disagreements over card games often escalated into lethal gunfights. But Doc Holliday soon gained a reputation as a man not to be trifled with. Though sickly and rake-thin at 6 foot tall and 130 pounds, Holliday was absolutely fearless. Combining a lightning-quick draw with icy calm and ruthless precision, he is believed to have been involved in at least 9 shootouts and as many as 50 duels during his lifetime. But Doc Holliday truly made his mark on history due to his close friendship with the famous lawman Wyatt Earp. The two met in Texas in 1877 and quickly formed an unbreakable bond. Despite being on opposite sides of the law, Earp and Holliday recognized in each other a sense of honor, loyalty, and courage that transcended their surface differences. Their friendship would be put to the ultimate test during the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral in October 1881. The Earp brothers, Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan, along with Doc Holliday, faced off against the notorious outlaw cowboys, the Clantons and McClorys, in a legendary showdown that lasted just 30 seconds, but left 3 men dead and cemented the participants' places in the annals of Wild West history. The aftermath of the OK Corral shootout was almost as dramatic as the gunfight itself. Doc and the Earps faced murder charges and death threats from the cowboys. Morgan Earp was assassinated, and Virgil Earp was maimed in ambushes. Wyatt Earp set out on his infamous vendetta ride to avenge his brothers, and Doc Holliday rode by his side, as always. Their friendship endured through all the bloodshed and chaos. But as the frontier was gradually tamed, there was one foe that Doc Holliday could not outshoot or outrun. Tuberculosis continued to weaken his body even as his legend grew. Moving from town to town and operating saloons and gambling halls, his health continued to deteriorate. In 1887, Holliday traveled to the booming silver town of Glenwood Springs, Colorado, hoping to take advantage of the hot springs for which it was famous. He spent his last 57 days there, bedridden in a hotel room, being cared for by his longtime companion, Big Nose Kate. As the end approached and someone went to fetch a priest, Kate asked him if he wanted to die with his boots on. Holliday's famous last word were, "This is funny." He always found humor in life's darkest moments. John Henry Doc Holliday died on November 8, 1887, at the age of 36. Newspapers of the day plastered lurid headlines about the death of the notorious gambler and gunman. But those who knew him best remembered him differently, as a fiercely loyal friend, a refined Southern gentleman, and a man of rare courage and grit, who squeezed a lifetimes of living into his few short decades. He embodied so many of the contradictions of the Wild West, and his legend endures as a testament to an era when determined men and women carved out lives on the brutal frontier through boldness, ingenuity, and sheer force of will. Doc Holliday's story is just one thread in the rich tapestry of the American West, a time and place where history and myth blended together and larger-than-life characters faced staggering challenges. The violence and lawlessness that Holliday and the Earp brothers combated in towns like Tombstone were symptoms of a society with limited law enforcement and lots of desperate men with guns. Taking the law into one's own hands was often a necessity for survival. Moreover, the endemic poverty and lack of economic opportunity in the West gave rise to outlaws in the first place. Many young men in places like Tombstone saw crime as their only path to fortune and turned to cattle, rustling, stagecoach robberies, and other illicit activities. This kept towns like Tombstone mired in a constant cycle of violence. But perhaps the most tragic source of bloodshed in the Old West was the continued clash between settlers and Native Americans. The Apache people of Arizona and New Mexico fiercely resisted white encroachment on their ancestral lands throughout the latter half of the 19th century. Legendary warriors like Geronimo and Cochise led years-long guerrilla campaigns against the US Army and raided settlements across the Southwest. The Apache were ultimately defeated through a combination of superior numbers and technology, scorched earth tactics, and forced relocation to dismal reservations. The story of their struggle is a stark reminder of the human cost of westward expansion and the theft of native lands upon which frontier towns like Tombstone were built. But even for the white settlers who prevailed, life in these remote outposts was full of dangers and hardships. Apache raiders were just one threat among many. Medical care was primitive at best, and diseases like smallpox, diphtheria, and dysentery spread like wildfire through mining camps and cow towns. Accidents, especially in the treacherous mines that dotted the West, killed and maimed countless workers. Something as small as an infected cut or a rattlesnake bite could easily prove fatal. And yet, tens of thousands of bold settlers still streamed west every year, lured by the promise of land, riches, and a chance to start anew. They faced the wilderness with a tenacity and self-reliance that became enshrined as core American values. The taming of the Wild West is a story of individual grit and determination, as much as it is a story of collective violence and dispossession. Even as the frontier disappeared and the great western cities rose, the hard-bitten culture of the Old West lived on. It can still be glimpsed today in the rugged individualism of Western communities, in the vast stretches of open country, in the enduring myth of the cowboy. The Wild West of Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp may be gone, but it is certainly not forgotten. So the next time you find yourself marveling at a Western movie shootout or daydreaming about riding off into a desert sunset, take a moment to remember the complex and often brutal realities that define the real American frontier. Behind the tall tales and dime novels was a society forged through blood and toil, where life was fragile but people were strong, and where the bonds of loyalty and friendship were often the only things standing between survival and ruin. The Wild West has captured the imaginations of generations of Americans precisely because of these dramatic contrasts, the savagery and the nobility, the desperation and the hope. Its story is the story of a young nation coming into its own and defining its character through an epic confrontation with a fierce and unforgiving landscape. It was a crucible that tested the American experiment and found it equal to the challenge. So as we bid goodnight to the ghosts of Tombstone and drift off to sleep, let us spare a thought for the indomitable men and women who braved that crucible and left their mark upon history. Theirs was a brutal world, but also a world of possibility and raw human courage. And in that courage, we might just find some inspiration to face down the challenges of our own modern frontiers, whatever they might be. As we've seen, the sad fate of Ute Chief Blackhawk and his people was just one chapter in the long, tragic history of conflict between Native Americans and white settlers in the 19th century American West. The encroachment of miners, ranchers, homesteaders, and railroad companies on tribal lands sparked tensions that often erupted into violence. Broken treaties, forced relocations to desolate reservations, and outright warfare decimated many once proud native communities. Aggressive military campaigns subdued tribes and confined them to ever-shrinking territories. On top of the direct hostilities, the destruction of food sources like buffalo herds and the introduction of European diseases like smallpox ravaged native populations. It's estimated that there were over 5 million Native Americans living in what is now the United States in 1492. By the end of the 19th century, only about 250,000 remained, a staggering loss of life and culture. The nomadic Plains Indians were among the hardest hit. The Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Comanche, and other horse cultures of the Great Plains saw their traditional ways of life completely upended as millions of settlers poured through their ancestral hunting grounds along the overland trails to Oregon, California, and Utah. Once the US government and white settlers resolved to seize control of the vast interior grasslands for farming and ranching, clashes became inevitable. And with a series of lopsided treaties in the late 1860s forcing tribes onto smaller and smaller reservations, tensions finally boiled over in bloodshed. The Sioux War of 1876, also known as the Black Hills War, was one of the most famous and tragic of these conflicts. It was sparked by white prospectors flooding into the Black Hills of South Dakota after gold was discovered there. Lands that had been promised to the Sioux in perpetuity in an 1868 treaty. Sioux leaders like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse refused to cede the sacred Black Hills and vowed to defend their territory. The US government responded by ordering all Sioux to report to their reservations by January 31st, 1876, or be considered hostile. When many bands refused to comply, the army dispatched troops to bring them in. On June 25th, 1876, one of those patrols, led by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, stumbled upon a huge encampment of Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho along the Little Bighorn River in Montana. Custer, a vain and reckless officer with a history of impetuous attacks, ignored warnings about the size of the native force and rashly ordered his badly outnumbered 7th Cavalry Regiment to attack. In the ensuing battle, later known as Custer's Last Stand, thousands of native warriors led by Crazy Horse surrounded and completely wiped out Custer and over 250 of his men. It was the worst military defeat the army had ever suffered at the hands of Native Americans. But while Little Bighorn was a resounding victory for the Sioux and Cheyenne, it also sealed their doom. A vengeful American public demanded a decisive response. The US government redoubled its efforts to crush native resistance, pouring troops and resources into the region. Over the next year, relentless army campaigns destroyed native villages, slaughtered their horse herds, and drove the starving survivors onto reservations. Sitting Bull and a few holdouts fled to Canada for a few years. But by the early 1880s, the Plains Indian tribes were utterly defeated and their traditional life destroyed. The confinement to bleak reservations led to crippling poverty, despair, and dependence on government provisions that still scar many native communities to this day. So, while a tenacious few like Crazy Horse fought valiantly to preserve their ancestral lands and way of life, in the end, the unstoppable tide of American expansion made the way of the Plains Indians another sad casualty of the conquest of the West. The lonely, windswept battlefields and once teeming tribal lands became another sobering reminder of the brutal human toll it took to transform the frontier into the modern American West we know today. Of course, the unforgiving geography and conflicts with Native Americans were just some of the many perils of life on the frontier. Settlers also had to contend with an array of natural dangers and disasters that could wipe out a homestead or small town in the blink of an eye. From searing droughts to lashing hailstorms to stampeding grasshoppers, the weather west of the 100th meridian has always been mercurial and unforgiving. Blizzards could dump several feet of snow in a matter of hours, burying livestock, destroying crops, and leaving isolated settlers cut off for weeks. Searing summer heat waves baked the earth into concrete and withered plants in the fields. The arid climate of much of the West meant that access to water was always a precarious proposition. Many homesteaders were lured by the promise of lush farmland, only to find their plots rendered nearly worthless by a lack of reliable rainfall or irrigation. Failed crops and wells running dry were a common story. When rain did come, it often arrived in the form of catastrophic flash floods and powerful tornadoes, especially on the Great Plains. With little warning, a thunderstorm could send a wall of water rampaging down an arroyo, or a twister could obliterate a small town, leaving a swath of matchsticks where homes and barns once stood. Even in times of more normal weather, frontier families faced a constant menace from the local wildlife. Wolves, mountain lions, and bears considered the settlers' livestock, and occasionally the settlers themselves, to be easy prey. Venomous snakes like rattlers and water moccasins posed a hidden danger in woodpiles and stream banks. And woe to any settler who accidentally sat on a concealed scorpion or disturbed a nest of fire ants. Then there were the massive insect infestations that could blacken the skies and strip the landscape bare. Of these, the most infamous were the hordes of Rocky Mountain locusts, a type of grasshopper that periodically swarmed much of the West in staggering numbers. In the worst outbreak in 1875, an estimated 3.5 trillion locusts formed a ravenous swarm 1,800 miles long and 110 miles wide that ravaged crops from the Dakotas to Texas. The mind-boggling infestation likely measured 198,000 square miles, larger than the state of California. Witnesses described skies darkened by the whirring clouds of insects and trees and fence posts that sagged under the sheer weight of the clinging swarms. When the locusts descended on an area, their voracious appetites could strip a field of 100 acres of crops in a matter of hours, leaving behind only denuded stalks. In total, the 1875 swarms caused $200 million in crop damage, over $116 billion in today's dollars. In some hard-hit counties, 90% of the wheat crop was lost, and farmers were left destitute and facing starvation. A particular severe infestation in 1893, combined with the economic upheaval of the Panic of 1893, created especially dire conditions in the West. In Nebraska alone that year, the locusts consumed $5 million of crops. Coming on the heels of a financial crash, the plague contributed to a wave of farm bankruptcies and business failures across the region. The locusts finally went extinct around 1900, likely due to a combination of habitat loss and changing climate. But their grim legacy lingered for decades. So between the droughts, the floods, the blizzards, the tornadoes, the animal attacks, and the insect plagues, farming on the frontier was always a white-knuckled gamble against the elements. A settler never knew when months of back-breaking labor could be reduced to a barren wasteland in a matter of minutes. It took nerves of steel and an almost superhuman resilience to eke out an existence in the face of such regular, natural calamities. And yet, for all the constant hardships and dangers, a surprising number of settlers managed to find moments of joy, beauty, and triumph in their unforgiving new home. Against all odds, small frontier towns gradually took root and bloomed into thriving communities. Through sheer grit and ingenuity, hardy pioneers found ways to scratch out a living from the ravaged soil. Slowly but surely, the vast wilderness was tamed, crisscrossed with roads and rails, and transformed into ranches, farms, and settlements, the foundations of the American West we know today. Much of that progress was due to a rare breed of men and women whose courage, toughness, and determination allowed them to overcome incredible adversity and leave a lasting mark on the frontier. Rugged folk heroes whose stories became the stuff of legend. Men like El Fuego Baca, a 6-foot-tall, 19-year-old Mexican-American cowboy who faced down 80 angry Texas cowboys in one of the most lopsided gunfights in history. The year was 1884, and Baca was working as a ranch hand and part-time deputy sheriff in the rugged San Mateo Mountains of New Mexico. Tensions were running high between the local Hispanic ranchers and cattle rustlers from Texas who were terrorizing the area, after Baca arrested a drunken cowboy named Charlie McCarty for firing his pistol in the air on a dusty Socorro street. McCarty's fellow cowboys decided to take matters into their own hands. The next day, a mob of 80 heavily armed Texans rode into town, threatening to shoot any Mexican who got their way and vowing to bust their friend out of jail. When they found Baca, the mob opened fire on the young lawman, who dove through a door into a small adobe jacal house. Over the next 33 hours, Baca single-handedly held off the army of attackers, killing 4 and wounding 8. Despite the cowboys firing thousands of rounds of ammunition and even pushing a wagon loaded with burning hay against the building, they couldn't dislodge the stubborn deputy. Finally, out of ammo and with several wounded, the humiliated Texans slunk out of town, leaving Baca as the last man standing. The Frisco Shootout, as it became known, made the young Latino lawman a living legend and an enduring symbol of the indomitable frontier spirit. Batza went on to a long career in law enforcement and politics, serving as a sheriff, mayor, district attorney, and even a general in the Mexican Revolution. But he would always be remembered as the feisty underdog who faced down a mob of heavily armed cowboys and somehow lived to tell the tale, a fitting metaphor for life in the Wild West. So while the frontier was undoubtedly a harsh, brutal, and unforgiving place, it also forged an extraordinary type of character, one defined by resilience, resourcefulness, and sheer force of will. The kind of men and women who could stare down adversity and find a way to overcome, no matter the odds. It's a spirit that still echoes in the self-reliant, can-do attitude of Westerners today. A toughness born of necessity in a land where survival was never a given. A place where grit and tenacity were the only things standing between you and an early grave. Though the Wild West of the popular imagination is long gone, replaced by the fences, highways, and cities of the modern world, its legacy endures. The epic struggles of those early pioneers paved the way for the thriving region we know today. So the next time you find yourself gazing at a purple sage sunset over the mesas or marveling at the rugged peaks of the Rockies, spare a thought for those who came before. The hardy men and women who braved the perils of an untamed wilderness and through their sweat, blood, and tears carved a new nation from the frontier. Their sacrifices and their indomitable spirit in the face of incredible odds laid the foundation for the American West, and they will forever be woven into the fabric of this vast, beautiful, and still wild land. And with that, we come to the end of our journey through the real Wild West, a place of myth and legend, but also of harsh realities and brutal challenges. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the gritty truth behind the Hollywood version of the Old West. It's a history that's often overshadowed by the romantic tales of noble cowboys and dastardly outlaws, but one that's every bit as fascinating, and perhaps even more revealing of the true character of the American frontier. So if you've found these true stories of the West compelling, I encourage you to delve deeper. There are so many more rich veins of history to mine, from the diverse immigrant groups that helped settle the region to the technological marvels that tamed the wilderness. But most of all, I hope these often overlooked stories of the real Old West have given you a newfound appreciation for the grit, resilience, and sheer force of will it took to build a life on the frontier. The next time you see a sun-weathered face in a western town or gaze out over the rugged expanses of the Great Plains, remember the extraordinary men and women who came before, and the incredible hardships they overcame to make the West what it is today. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the hidden history of the Wild West. If you've enjoyed this video, I'd be honored if you'd consider liking it and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into fascinating chapters of our past. But for now, I hope you'll drift off to sleep with visions of dusty trails and sprawling mesas in your head, and perhaps a newfound respect for those who braved the perils of the untamed frontier. Sweet dreams, and until next time, good night.